Chapter 44 of Brave Men and Women, Their Struggles, Failures, and Triumphs by Osgood E. Fuller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kristen Hand. Joan of Arc, born 1412, died 1431. The peasant maiden who delivered her country and became a martyr in its cause. No story of heroism has greater attractions for youthful readers than that of Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orleans. It would be long to tell how for hundreds of years the greatest jealousy and mistrust existed between England and France, and how constant disputes between their several sovereigns led to wars and tumults. How in the time of Henry V of England a state of wild confusion existed on the continent, and how that king also claimed to be King of France. How this fifth Henry was married to Catherine, daughter of King Charles, and how they were crowned King and Queen of France. How in the midst of his triumphs Henry died, and his son, an infant less than a year old, was declared king in his stead. How wars broke out, and how, at last, a simple maiden saved her country from the grasp of ambitious men. Hardly anything in history is more wonderful than the way in which she raised up to serve her country's need, and having served it, died a martyr in its cause. Joan of Arc, Maid of Orleans, was born in the forest of Gros, upon the Meuse, in the village of Domremy in Lorraine, in the year 1412. At this time, France was divided into two factions, the Burgundians and the Armagnacs, the former of whom favored the English cause, and the latter pledged to the cause of their country. Joan was the daughter of simple villagers. She was brought up religiously, and from her earliest youth is said to have seen visions and dreamed dreams. The one great dream of her life was, however, the deliverance of her country from foreign invasions and domestic broils. When only about 13 years of age, she announced to the astonished townspeople that she had a mission and that she meant to fulfill it. The disasters of the war reached Joan's home. A party of Burgundians dashed into Domremy, and the Armagnacs fled before them. Joan's family took refuge in the town of Neufchâteau, and she paid for their lodging at an inn by helping the mistress of the house. Here, in a more public place, it was soon seen and wondered at that such a young girl was so much interested in the war. Her parents were already angry that she would not marry. They began to be frightened now. Jacques d'Arc told one of his sons that sooner than let Joan go to the camp he would drown her with his own hands. She could not, however, be kept back. Very cautiously, and as though afraid to speak of such high things, she began to let fall hints of what she saw. Half frightened herself at what she said, she claimed to a neighbor, "There is now, between Colombey and Vaucouleurs, a maid who will cause the King of France to be crowned." Now came the turn in the war when all the strength of both sides was to be gathered up into one great struggle, and it was to be shown whether the king was to have his right or the usurper triumph. The real leaders of the war were the Duke of Bedford, Regent of England, and the captains of the French army. Bedford gathered a vast force, chiefly from Burgundy, and gave its command to the Earl of Salisbury. The army went on. They gained without a struggle the towns of Rambouillet, Pithouir, Zargines, and others. Then they encamped before the city of Orleans. To this point they drew their whole strength. Orleans taken, the whole country beyond was theirs, as it commanded the entrance to the river Loire and the southern provinces. And the only stronghold left to King Charles was the mountain country of Auvergne and Dauphine. The men of Orleans well knew how much depended upon their city. All that could be done they did to prepare for a resolute defense. The siege of Orleans was one of the first in which cannon were used. Salisbury, visiting the works, a cannon broke a splinter from a casement which struck him and gave him his death wound. The Earl of Suffolk, who was appointed to succeed him, never had his full power. Suffolk could not tame the spirit of the men of Orleans by regular attack, so he tried other means. He resolved to block it up by surrounding it with forts and starve the people out. But for some time before the works were finished, food was brought into the city, while the French troops scouring the plains as often stopped the supplies coming to the English. Faster, however, than they were brought in, the provisions in Orleans wasted away, and through the dreary winter the citizens watched one fort after another rise around them. The enemy was growing stronger, they were growing weaker. They had no prospect before them but defeat. When the spring came would come the famine, their city would be lost, and then their country. The eyes of all France were were upon Orleans. News of the siege and of the distress came to Domremy, and Joan of Arc rose to action. Her mind was fixed to go and raise the siege of Orleans and crown Charles king. Not for one moment did she think it impossible or even unlikely. What God had called her to do, that she would carry out. She made no secret of her call, but went to Vaucouleurs and told de Briancourt that she meant to save France. At first the governor treated her lightly and told her to go home and dream about a sweetheart. But such was her earnestness that at last not only he, but thousands of other people believed in the mission of Joan of Arc. And so before many days she set out with many noble attendants to visit Charles at the castle of Chinon. On all who saw her, Joan's earnestness, singleness of heart, and deep piety made but one impression. Only the king remained undecided. He could hardly be roused to see her, but at last he named a day, and Joan of Arc had her desire and stood before him in the great hall of Chinon. 50 torches lighted the hall, which was crowded with knights and nobles. Joan, too self-forgetful to feel abashed, walked forward firmly. Charles had placed himself among his courtiers so that she should not know him. Not by inspiration, as they thought, but because with her enthusiasm she must have heard him described often and often, she at once singled him out and clasped his knees. Charles denied that he was the king. In the name of God, Joan answered, it no other but yourself. Most noble Lord Dauphin, I am Joan, the maid sent on the part of God to aid you and your kingdom, and by his command I announce to you that you shall be crowned in the city of Reims, and shall become his lieutenant in the realm of France. Charles led her aside, and told his courtiers afterward that in their private conversation she had revealed to him secrets. But all that she said appears to have been, I tell thee from my lord that thou art the true heir of France. A few days before, the king had offered a prayer for help only on condition that he was the rightful sovereign, and it has been well said that such a coincidence of idea on so obvious a topic seems very far from supernatural or even surprising. It is but one out of many proofs how ready everyone in those days was to believe in signs and wonders. Her fame spread wide. There went abroad all kinds of reports about her miraculous powers. Already the French began to hope and the English to wonder. The king still doubted, and so did his council. People in our own day who admire the wisdom of the Dark Ages would do well to study the story of Joan of Arc. She was taken before the University of Poitiers. 6 weeks did the learned doctors employ in determining whether Joan was sent by God or in league with the devil. She never made any claim to supernatural help beyond what she needed to fulfill her mission. She refused to give them a sign, saying that her sign would be at Orleans, the leading of brave men to battle. She boasted no attainments, declaring that she knew neither A nor B, only she must raise the siege of Orleans and crown the Dauphin. The friars sent to her old home to inquire about her and brought back a spotless report of her life. So, after the tedious examination, the judgment of the learned and wise men of Poitiers was that Charles might accept her services without peril to his soul. The vexatious delays over, Joan of Arc set out for Orleans. In the church of Fierbois, she had seen among other old weapons a sword marked with 5 crosses. For this she sent. When she left Vaucouleurs, she had put on a man's dress. Now she was clad in white armor. A banner was prepared under her directions. This also was white, strewn with the lilies of France. So much time had been lost that Joan was not at Blois till the middle of April. She entered the town on horseback. Her head was uncovered. All men admired her skillful riding and the poise of her lance. Joan carried all before her now. She brought spirit to the troops. The armor laid down was buckled on afresh when she appeared. The hearts of the people were lifted up. They would have died for her. Charles, who had been with the army, slipped back to Chinon, but he left behind him better and braver men, his 5 bravest leaders. Joan began her work gloriously by clearing the camp of all bad characters. Father Pasquerel bore her banner through the streets, while Joan, with the priests who followed, sang the litany and exhorted men to prepare for battle by repentance and prayer. In this, as in all else, she succeeded. When the English heard that Joan was really coming, they pretended to scorn her. Common report made Joan a prophet and a worker of miracles. Hearts beat higher in Orleans than they had done for months. More terror was in the English camp than it had ever known before. The English took no heed of Joan's order to submit. They little thought that in a fortnight they would flee before a woman. She entered the city at midnight. LaFayette and 200 men with lances were her escort. Though she had embarked close under an English fort, she was not molested. Untouched by the enemy, coming in the midst of the storm, bringing plenty, and the lights of her procession shining in the black night, we cannot wonder that the men of Orleans looked on her as in very truth the messenger of God. They flocked round her, and he who could touch but her horse was counted happy. Joan went straight to the cathedral where she had the Te Deum chanted. The people thought that already they were singing their thanksgivings for victory. Despair was changed to hope, fear to courage. She was known as the Maid of Orleans. From the cathedral she went to the house of one of the most esteemed ladies of the town with whom she had chosen to live. A great supper had been prepared for her, but she took only a bit of bread sopped in wine before she went to sleep. By her orders, the next day an archer fastened to his arrow a letter of warning and shot it into the English lines. She went herself along the bridge and exhorted the enemy to depart. Sir William Gladsdale tried to conceal his fright by answering her with such rude words as made her weep. 4 days afterwards, the real terror of the English was shown. The Maid of Orleans and LaFayette went to meet the second load of provisions. As it passed close under the English lines, not an arrow was shot against it. Not a man appeared. Joan of Arc was now to win as much glory by her courage as before her very name had brought. While she was lying down to rest that same afternoon, the townspeople went out to attack the Bastille of Saint-Loup. They had sent her no word of the fight, but Joan started suddenly from her bed, declaring that her voices told her to go against the English. She put on her armor, mounted her horse, and with her banner in her hand, galloped through the street. The French were retreating, but they gathered again round her white banner, and Joan led them on once more. Her spirit rose with the thickness of the fight. She dashed right into the midst. The battle raged for 3 hours round the Bastille of Saint-Loup. Then Joan led on the French to storm it. Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orleans, had gained her first victory. The day after there was no fighting, for it was the Feast of the Ascension. Joan had been first in the fight yesterday. She was first in prayer today. She brought many of the soldiers to their knees for the first time in their lives. All along the captains had doubted the military skill of the simplest girl they had ever seen, and they did not call her to the council that they held that day. They resolved to attack the English forts on the southern and weakest side. After a little difficulty, Joan consented when she was told of it. The next day, before daybreak, she took her place with LaFayette on a small island in the Loire, from whence they crossed in boats to the southern bank. Their hard day's work was set about early. Joan would not wait for more troops, but began to fight at once. The English joined 2 garrisons together, and thus for a time overpowered the French as they attacked the Bastille of the Augustines. Carried on for a little while with the flying, Joan soon turned round again upon the enemy. The sight of the witch, as they thought her, was enough. The English screened themselves from her and her charms behind their walls. Help was coming up for the French. They made a fresh attack. The Bastille was taken and set on fire. Joan returned to the city slightly wounded in the foot. The only fort left to the English was their first made and strongest, the Bastille des Tourniers. It was held by the picked men of their army, Gladsdale and his company. The French leaders wished to delay its attack until they had fresh soldiers. This suited Joan little. "You have been to your council," she said, "and I have been to mine. Be assured that the counsel of my lord will hold good, and that the counsel of men will perish." The hearts of the people were with her. The leaders thought it best to give in. Victory followed wherever she led, and after several actions at which she took active part, the siege was raised. It began on the 12th of October, 1428, and was raised on the 14th of May, 1429. Even now, in Orleans, the 14th of May is held sacred, that day on which, in 1429, the citizens watched the English line growing less and less in the distance. Joan of Arc had even yet done but half her work. Neither Charles nor Henry had been crowned. That the crown should be placed on Charles's head was what she still had to accomplish. Though we have always spoken of him as king, he was not so in reality until this had been done. He was strictly but the Dauphin. Bedford wished much that young Henry should be crowned, for let Charles once have the holy crown on his brow and the oil of anointing on his head, and let him stand where for hundreds of years his fathers had stood to be consecrated kings of France in the cathedral of Rheims before his people as their king. Any crowning afterwards would be a mockery. Charles was now with the court of Tours. Rheims was a long way off in the north, and to get there would be a work of some difficulty. Yet get there he must, for the coronation could not take place anywhere else. Joan went to Tours, and falling before him, she begged him to go and receive his crown, saying that when her voices gave her this message, she was marvelously rejoiced. Charles did not seem much rejoiced to receive it. He said a great deal about the dangers of the way, and preferred that the other English posts on the Loire should be taken first. It must have been very trying to one so quick and eager as Joan to deal with such a person, but good or bad, he was her king. She was not idle because she could not do exactly as she wished. She set out with the army at once. The news flew onwards. The inhabitants of Chalon and of Rheims rose and turned out the Burgundian garrisons. The king's way to Rheims was one triumph, and amidst the shouts of the people he entered Rheims on the 16th of July. The next day, Charles VII was crowned. The visions of the maid had been fulfilled. By her arms, Orleans had been saved. Through her means, the king stood there. She was beside the king at the high altar, with her banner displayed, and when the service was over, she knelt before him with streaming eyes, saying, "Gentle king, now is done the pleasure of God, who willed that you should come to Rheims and be anointed, showing that you are the true king, and he to whom the kingdom should belong." All eyes were upon her as the savior of her country. She might have secured everything for herself, but she asked no reward. She was content to have done her duty. And of all that was offered her, the only thing she would accept was that Domremy should be free forever from any kind of tax. So until the time of the first French Revolution, the collectors wrote against the name of the village as it stood in their books, nothing for the maid's sake. Joan of Arc said that her work was done. She had seen her father and her uncle in the crowd, and with many tears she begged the king to let her go back with them and keep her flocks and herds and do all as she had been used to do. Never had man or woman done so much with so simple a heart. But the king and his advisers knew her power over the people, and their entreaties that she would stay with them prevailed. So she let her father and her uncle depart without her. They must have had enough to tell when they reached home. We have little heart to tell the rest of the story. At length the king reached Paris, and the Duke of Bedford was away in Normandy. Joan wished to attack the city, and it was done. Many of the soldiers were jealous of her, and they fought only feebly. They crossed the first ditch round the city, but found the second full of water. Joan was trying its depth with her lance when she was seriously wounded. She lay on the ground cheering the troops, calling for faggots and bundles of wood to fill the trench, nor would she withdraw until the evening, when the Duke of Alençon persuaded her to give up the attempt, as it had prospered so ill. Were it not so wicked and so shameful, it might be laughable to think of the king's idleness. It is really true that he longed for his lovely Chinon and a quiet life, as a tired child longs to go to sleep. He made his misfortune at Paris, which would have stirred up almost anyone else to greater exertions, an excuse for getting away. The troops were sent to winter quarters. He went back across the Loire now, when the English leader was away, and the chief towns in the north ready to submit. Had he but shown himself a man, he might have gained his capital and the whole of the north of France. The spirit lately roused for him was down again. It seemed really not worth while to fight for a king who would not attend to business for more than 2 months together. We know little more of the Maid of Orleans in the winter than that she continued with the army. After her defeat at Paris, she hung her armor up in the church at St. Denis and made up her mind to go home. The entreaties of the French leaders prevailed again, for though they were jealous of her and slighted her on every occasion, they knew her power and were glad to get all out of her that they could. In December, Joan and all her family were made nobles by the king. They changed their name from Arc to du Lys, Lys being French for lily, the flower of France, as the rose is of England, and they were given the lily of France for their coat of arms. With the return of spring, the king's troops marched into the northern provinces. Charles would not leave Chinon. The army was utterly disorderly and had no idea what to set about. Joan showed herself as brave as ever in such fighting as there was, but doubting whether she was in her right place or her wrong one, in the midst of fierce and lawless men, nothing pointed out for her to do. Her situation was most miserable. The Duke of Gloucester sent out a proclamation to strengthen the hearts of the English troops against her. The title was, "Against the feeble-minded captains and soldiers who are terrified by the incantations of the Maid." A long and troublesome passage had Joan of Arc from this bad world to her home in heaven, where dwelt those whom she called her brothers of paradise. Her faith was to be tried in the fire, purified 7 times. All the French army were jealous of her. The governor of the fortress of Compiègne was cruel and tyrannical beyond all others, even in that age. Compiègne was besieged by the English. Joan threw herself bravely into the place. She arrived there on the 24th of May, and that same evening she headed a party who went out of the gates to attack the enemy. Twice they were driven back by her, but seeing more coming up, she made the sign to go back. She kept herself the last. The city gate was partly closed, so that but few could pass in at once. In the confusion, she was separated from her friends, but she still fought bravely, until an archer from Picardy seized her and dragged her from her horse. She struggled, but was obliged to give up, and so the Maid of Orleans was taken prisoner. Joan was first taken to the quarters of John of Luxembourg. Her prison was changed many times, but the English were eager to have her in their own power. In November, John of Luxembourg sold her to them for a large sum of money. When she was in his prison, she had tried twice to escape. She could not try now. She was put in the great tower of the castle of Rouen, confined between iron gratings, with irons upon her feet. Her guards offered her all kinds of rudeness, and even John of Luxembourg was so mean as to go and rejoice over her in her prison. It would have been a cruel thing to put her to death as a prisoner of war, but those were dark days, and such things were often done. The desire of the English was to hold Joan up to public scorn as a witch, and to prove that she had dealings with the devil. With this wicked object, they put her on trial. They found Frenchmen ready enough to help them. One Canchon, Bishop of Beauvais, even petitioned that the trial might be under his guidance. He had his desire. He was appointed the first judge, and 102 other learned Frenchmen were found ready to join him. Before these false judges, Joan of Arc was called, as simple a girl as she was when just 2 years before she left Domremy. All that malice and rage could do was done against her. She was alone before her enemies. Day after day they tried hard to find new and puzzling questions for her, to make her false on her own showing, to make her deny her visions or deny her God. They could not. Clear-headed, simple-hearted she had been always, and she was so still. She showed the faith of a Christian, the patience of a saint, in all her answers. Piety and wisdom were with her, wickedness and folly with her enemies. They tried to make evil out of 2 things in particular: her banner, with which it was declared she worked charms, and the tree she used to dance around when she was a child, where they said she went to consult the fairies. Concerning her banner, Joan said that she had carried it on purpose to spare the sword, so that she might not kill anyone with her own hand. Of the tree, she denied that she knew anything about fairies or was acquainted with anyone who had seen them there. She was tormented with questions as to whether the saints spoke English when she saw them, what they wore, how they smelt, whether she helped the banner or the banner her, whether she was in mortal sin when she rode the horse belonging to the Bishop of Senlis, whether she could commit mortal sin, whether the saints hated the English. Every trap they could lay for her they laid. She answered all clearly. When she had forgotten anything, she said so. Her patience never gave way. She was never confused. When asked whether she was in a state of grace, she said, "If I am not, I pray to God to bring me to it, and if I am, may he keep me in it." After all, they did not dare condemn her. Try as they could draw nothing from her that was wrong. They teased her to give the matter into the hands of the Church. She put the Church in heaven, and its head above the Church on earth and the Pope. The English were afraid that after all she might escape, and pressed on the judgment. The lawyers at Rouen would say nothing, neither would the chapter. The only way to take was to send the report of the trial to the University of Paris and wait the answer. On the 19th of May arrived the answer from Paris. It was this: that the Maid of Orleans was either a liar or in alliance with Satan and with Behemoth, that she was given to superstition, most likely an idolater, that she lowered the angels and vainly boasted and exalted herself, that she was a blasphemer and a traitor thirsting for blood, a heretic and an apostate. Yet they would not burn her at once. They would first disgrace her in the eyes of people. This was done on the 23rd of May. A scaffold was put up behind the cathedral of St. Onnen. Here in solemn state sat the Cardinal of Winchester, 2 judges, and 33 helpers. On another scaffold was Joan of Arc in the midst of guards, notaries to take reports, and the most famous preacher of France to admonish her. Below was seen the rack upon a cart. The preacher began his discourse. Joan let him speak against herself, but she stopped him when he spoke against the king, that king for whom she had risked everything, but who was dreaming at Chinon, and had not stretched out a finger to save her. Their labor was nearly lost. Her enemies became furious. Persuading was of no use. She refused to go back from anything she had said or done. Her instant death was threatened if she continued obstinate, but if she would recant, she was promised deliverance from the English. "I will sign," she said at last. The cardinal drew a paper from his sleeve with a short denial. She put her mark on it. They kept their promise of mercy by passing this sentence upon her: "Joan, we condemn you, through our grace and moderation, to pass the rest of your days in prison, to eat the bread of grief and drink the water of anguish, and to bewail your sins." When she went back to prison, there was published through Rouen, not the short denial she had signed, but one 6 pages long. Joan was taken back to the prison from whence she came. The next few days were the darkest and saddest of all her life, yet they were the darkest before the dawn. She had, in the paper which she signed, promised to wear a woman's dress again, and she did so. Her enemies had now a sure hold on her. They could make her break her own oath. In the night her woman's dress was taken away, and man's clothes put in their place. She had no choice in the morning what to do. As soon as it was day, Canchon and the rest made haste to the prison to see the success of their plot. Canchon laughed and said, "She is taken. No more hope for her on earth, no friend with her, save that in the fiery furnace was one like unto the Son of God." Brought before her judges, Joan only said why she had put on her old dress. They could not hide their delight, and joked and laughed among themselves. God sent her hope and comfort. She knew that the time of her deliverance was near. She was to be set free by fire. They appointed the day after the morrow for her burning, but a few hours' notice was given her. She wept when she heard that she was to be burnt alive, but after a while she exclaimed, "I shall be tonight in paradise." 800 Englishmen conducted her to the marketplace. On her way, the wretched priest, L'Osseleur, threw himself on the ground before her and begged her to forgive him. 3 scaffolds had been set up. On one sat the cardinal with all his train. Joan and her enemies were on another. The third, a great towering pile built up so high that what happened on it should be in sight of all the town, had upon it the stake to which she was to be tied. Canchon began to preach to her. Her faith never wavered. Her Savior, her best friend, was with her. To him she prayed aloud before the gathered multitude. She declared that she forgave her enemies and begged her friends to pray for her. Even Canchon and the cardinal shed tears. But they hastened to dry their eyes and read the condemnation. All the false charges were named, and she was given over to death. They put her on the scaffold and bound her fast to the stake. Looking round on the crowd of her countrymen, who stood looking over, she exclaimed, "O Rouen, I fear thou wilt suffer for my death." A mitre was placed on her head with the words, "Relapsed heretic, apostate, idolater." Canchon drew near to listen whether even now she would not say something to condemn herself. Her only words were, "Bishop, I die through your means." Of the worthless king she said, "That which I have well or ill done, I did it of myself. The king did not advise me." These were her last words about earthly matters. The flames burnt from the foot of the pile, but the monk who held the cross before her did not move. He heard her from the midst of the fire call upon her Savior. Soon she bowed her head and cried aloud, "Jesus," and she went to be with him forever. We have little to add of the character of the Maid of Orleans. She was simple amid triumph and splendor, unselfish when she might have had whatever she had asked, humane and gentle even on the battlefield, patient in the midst of the greatest provocation, brave in the midst of suffering, firm in the faith and hope when all beside were cast down, blameless and holy in her life when all beside were wicked and corrupt. The English never recovered from the blow struck by the Maid. Their power in France gradually weakened. In 1435, peace was made between Charles VII and the Duke of Burgundy. One by one, the ill-gotten gains were given up, and the English king lost even the French provinces he inherited. In the year 1451, the only English possession in France was the town of Calais. This, too, was lost about 100 years after, in the reign of Queen Mary. Yet the kings of England kept the empty title of kings of France and put the lilies of France in their coat of arms until the middle of the reign of George III. The last incident in the strange story of Joan of Arc remains to be told. 10 years after her execution, to the amazement of all who knew him, Charles VII suddenly shook off his idleness and blazed forth a wise king, an energetic ruler. Probably in this, his better state of mind, he thought with shame and sorrow of Joan of Arc. In the year 1456, he ordered a fresh inquiry to be made. At this, everyone was examined who had known or seen her at any period of her short life. The judgment passed on her before was contradicted, and she was declared a good and innocent woman. They would have given the whole world then to have had her back and have made amends to her for their foul injustice. But the opinions of men no longer mattered to her. The 25 years since she had been burnt at Rouen had been the first 25 of her uncounted eternity of joy. The righteous perisheth, and no man layeth it to heart. And merciful men are taken away, none considering that the righteous is taken away from the evil to come. End of chapter 44. Chapter 45 of Brave Men and Women, Their Struggles, Failures, and Triumphs, by Osgood E. Fuller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kristen Hand. The Song of Work, Many Phases and Many Examples. Music. In every leaf and flower the pulse of music beats, and works the changes hour by hour in those divine retreats. Alike in star and clod one melody resides, which is the working will of God, beyond all power besides. It is by angels heard, by all of lower birth, the silent music of the Word, who works in heaven and earth. For music order is to which all work belongs, and in this wondrous world of His, work is the song of songs. Divine Workers. The Father hitherto and His eternal Son work, and still have work to do with each successive Son. O bow the heart in awe, and work as with the Lord, who with His everlasting law works on in sweet accord. Work is the law of love which rules the world below, which rules the brighter world above, through which, like God, we grow. And this and every day the work of love is rest, in which our sorrows steal away, which cares may not infest. The will of God. With heart as strong as fate, brave worker girt and shod, adore and know that naught is great except the will of God. O sweet, sweet light of day, through which such wonders run, Thou ownest in thy glorious sway allegiance to the sun. And thou, O human will, as wondrous as the light, canst thou thy little trust fulfill, save through another's might? With heart to conquer fate, brave worker girt and shod, work on and know that He is great who does the will of God. Laborare est orare. To labor is to pray, as some dear saint has said, and with this truth for many a day have I been comforted. The Lord has made me bold when I have labored most, and with His gifts so manifold has given the Holy Ghost. When I have idle been until the sun went down, mine eyes so dim have never seen His bright prophetic crown. O praise the Lord for work which maketh time so fleet, in which accusers never lurk, whose end is very sweet. Birds of Grace. O little birds of grace, today ye sweetly sing, yea, make my heart your nesting place, and all your gladness bring. When ye are in my heart, how swiftly pass the days, the fears and doubts of life depart, and leave their room to praise. My work I find as play, and all day long rejoice. But if I linger on my way, I hear this warning voice. With fervor work and pray, and let not coldness come, or the birds of grace will fly away to seek a warmer home. Duty. O work that duty shows through her revealing light, it is in thee my bosom glows with infinite delight. The shadows flee away like mist before the sun, and thy achievement seems to say, the will of God is done. Ah, what if duty seem a mistress cold and stern? Can he who owns her rule supreme from her caresses turn? O work that duty shows, in light so fair and clear, whoever thy completion knows, is minded heaven is near. Moses. In Pharaoh's dazzling court no work did Moses find that could heroic life support and fill his heart and mind. Beneath their grievous task did not his kindred groan, and a great voice above him ask, Dost thou thy brethren own? The work which duty meant at length he found and did, and built a grander monument than any pyramid. Sometimes his eyes were dim, all signs he could not spell, yet he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Discoverers. In search of greener shores, the Northmen braved the seas, and reached those faith-illumined rowers, our dear Hesperides. And when oblivion swept all their work away, and left for faith to feed upon but shadows lean and grey, Columbus dreamed the dream which fired a southern clime, and hailed a world, O toil supreme, as from the womb of time. God's dauntless witnesses for toil invincible, they gazed across uncharted seas on the invisible. God's order. In gazing into heaven, in idle ecstasy, what progress make ye to the haven where ye at length would be? In heaven-appointed work the sure ascension lies. O never yet did drone or shirk make headway to the skies. Who in his heart rebels has never ears to hear the morning and the evening bells on yonder shores so clear. For work communion is with God's one order here, and all the secret melodies which fill our lives with cheer. David. In action day by day, King David's manhood grew, a character to live for it was so strong and true. Hordes of misrule became as stubble to the fire, till songs of praise like leaping flame burst from his sacred lyre. He grappled with all rude and unpropitious things, a garden from the solitude smiled to the King of Kings. And fiercer yet the strife with mighty foes within, who stormed the fortress of his life and triumphed in his sin. Good out of evil. True David halted not when sin had cast him down, upon his royal life a blot, death reaching for his crown. His work was but half done, a man of action still, he struggled in the gloaming sun to do his Maker's will. Till in the golden light great words began to shine. In sorrow is exalting might, repentance is divine. And now the shepherd king, we count the human sire of one who turns our hungering into achieved desire. Elijah. Elijah through the night which shrouded Israel, in toiling groping for the light, foretold Emmanuel. And in heroic trust, the night would yield to day, his imperfections thick as dust along the desert way. His bold rebuking cry heard in the wilderness, till from the chariot of the sky his mantle fell to bless. The stern half-savage seer became a prophecy of gladness and the golden year in all high minstrelsy. Alamahus the monk. How well he wrought who stood against an ancient wrong, and left the spangles of his blood to light the sky of song. A gladiatorial show, and 80,000 men, for savage pastime all aglow, O marvel there and then. An unknown monk his life, defenseless interposed, forbade the old barbaric strife, the red arena closed. That unrecovered rout, those fire shafts from the sun, O Telemach, who shall doubt thy master's will was done? Washington. The deeds of Washington were lit with patriot flame. A crown for liberty he won, and won undying fame. He heard his country's cry, he heard her bugle call. 'Twas sweet to live for her or die, her cause was all in all. He heard the psalm of peace, he sought again the plow. O civic toil, canst thou increase the laurels for his brow? As with a father's hand he led the infant state, Colossus of his native land, he still is growing great. Lincoln. God placed on Lincoln's brow a sad, majestic crown. All enmity is friendship now, and martyrdom renown. A mighty-hearted man, he toiled at freedom's side, and lived as only heroes can, the truth in which he died. Like Moses' eyes so dim, all signs he could not spell, yet he endured as seeing him who is invisible. His life was under one who made and loveth all, and when his mighty work was done, how grand his coronal. Garfield. Of Garfield's finished days, so fair and all too few, destruction which at noonday strays could not the work undo. A martyr prostrate calm, I learn anew that pain achieves as God's subduing psalm what else were all in vain. Like Samson in his death with mightiest labor rife, the moments of thy halting breath were grandest of thy life. And now amid the gloom which pierces mortal years, there shines a star above thy tomb to smile away our tears. Not too near. O workers brave and true, whose lives are full of song, I dare not take too near a view, lest I should do you wrong. I only look to see the marks of sacrifice, the heraldry of sympathy, which can alone suffice. For nothing else is great, however proudly won, or has the light to indicate the will of God is done. Ah, who would judge what fire will surely burn away, and ask not what doth God require at the eternal day. Stonewall Jackson. God somehow owns the creeds that seem so much amiss, what time they bear heroic deeds above analysis. How in his burning zeal did Stonewall breast his fate, converted to his country's weal with fame beyond debate. Sincere and strong of heart, in very truth he thought, his ensign signaled duty's part, and as he thought he fought. And truth baptized in blood, as many a time before, gave honor to his soldierhood, though trailed the flag he bore. Work its own reward. O worker with the Lord, to crown thee with success, believe thy work its own reward, let self be less and less. In all things be sincere, afraid not of the light, a prophet of the golden year in simply doing right. And be content to serve a little one of God, in loyalty without reserve, a hero armored, shod. O this dear life of thine, of every charm bereft, will crumble in the fire divine, not, but ashes left. Now and here. O not tomorrow o'er afar, thy work is now and here. Thy bosom holds the fairest star, dost see it shining clear? The nearest things are great, remotest very small, to him with eyes to penetrate the silent coronal. So deep the basis lies of life's great pyramid, that out of reach with common eyes prophetic work is hid. His reign for which we pray, his kingdom undefiled, whose scepter shall not pass away, is in a little child. A little child. Come hither, little child, and bring thy heart to me. Thou art the true and unbeguiled, so full of melody. The presence of a child has taught me more of heaven, and more my heart has reconciled than Greece's immortal 7. For when I sometimes think that life is void of song, before a little child I sink, and own that I am wrong. And lo, my heart grows bright, that was so dark and drear, till in the tender morning light I find the Lord is near. Divine Presence. O when the Lord is near, the rainbow banners wave, the star I follow shineth clear, I am no more a slave. As if to honor him, my work is true and free, and flowing to the shining brim, the cup of heaven I see. I marvel not the song should be employment there, in which the innumerable throng their palms of triumph bear, or that the choral strife and golden harps express the stirring labors of the life of peace and righteousness. Death in life. The song of work I know has here its minor tone, and in its ever-changing flow, death in life is known. Discordant notes, alas, so often cleave the air, and smite the music as they pass, and leave their poison there. And oft, me, from some wild region of the heart, will startling imitations come, and peace at once depart. With open foes without, and secret foes within, his heart must needs be brave and stout, that would life's battle win. Evil. In the great kindness through which I hold my way, is there no refuge from distress, where foes are kept at bay? Saint Anthony of old could not from evil flee, the desert cave was found to hold his mortal enemy. And knew untiring Paul the world's relentless scorn, while in his flesh amid it all he bore another thorn. Our common lot is cast in a great camp of pain, Until the night be overpast, some foe will yet remain. With his foes. The king of beasts was dead, by an old hero slain. Did dreams of honey for his bread dance through the hero's brain? Or did he chafe at this, that pain is everywhere? Down, down, thou fabled right to bliss. Life is to do and bear. Beguiled, enslaved, made blind, yet unsubdued in will, he kept the old heroic mind to serve his country still. And in recovered might pulled the tall pillars down, died with his foes, that was his right, and built his great renown. For his foes. Devotion all supreme throbs in the mighty psalm of one who filled our highest dream and poured his healing balm, whose worlds inherited and yet renounced them all, who had not where to lay his head and drank the cup of gall, who emptied of his power became the foremost man, calm at the great prophetic hour through which God's purpose ran, who in the darkest fight imagination knows, saluted thee, eternal light, and died as for his foes. The Master. The Master many a day in pain and darkness wrought, through death to life he held his way, all lands the glory caught. And he unlocked the gain, shut up in grievous loss, and made the stairs to heaven as plain as his uplifted cross. The stairs of pain and woe in all the work on earth, upon which the patient toilers go to their eternal birth. O Master, Master mine, I read the legend now, to work and suffer is divine, all radiant on thy brow. Life in death. Strong children of decay, ye live by perishing. Tomorrow thrives on dead today, and joy on suffering. The labor of your hearts, like that of brain and hands, shall be for gain in other marts, for bread in other lands. And will you now despond amid consuming toil, when there is hope and joy beyond which death cannot despoil? Herein all comfort is, in usefulness and zeal. The Lord announces who are his and gives eternal weal. Sacrifice. Through stern and ruthless years beyond the ken of man, all filled with ruin, pain, and tears, has God worked out his plan. Change on the heels of change, like bloodhounds in the chase, has swept the earth in tireless range, spangled with heavenly grace. At last the mystery of the great cross of Christ, read with a worldwide agony, the God-man sacrificed. And from the sacrifice, the 7 great notes of peace, which pierce the clouds beneath all skies till pain and sorrow cease. The mind of Christ. Into the surging world, upon thy lips his word, and in thy hand his flag unfurled. Go, soldier of the Lord. Like him who came from far to toil for our release, and framed the startling notes of war out of the psalm of peace. And all the recompense which thou wilt ever need shall kindle in the throbbing sense of this life-laden creed. Grace has for him sufficed who has St. Michael's heart, the fullness of the mind of Christ to do a hero's part. Sympathy. The Master we revere who bled on Calvary to fill us with heroic cheer abides eternally. From his ascended heights above the pain and ruth, to all his servants he delights to come in grace and truth. His presence is so dear, his face so brave and fair, that all our heavy burdens here he somehow seems to share. Co-partner in our work, he every pain beguiles. How can the fear of failure lurk in that on which he smiles? Love for love. Master, for thy dear sake I bear my anguish now, and in thy blessed cross partake, whose sign is on my brow. For thy dear sake I toil, who didst so toil for me. O more than balm or wine or oil, the cheer that comes from thee. For thy dear sake I live, a servant unto all, and know that thou wilt surely give thyself as coronal. For thy dear sake I watch, and keep my flag unfurled, until her golden gleam I catch, sweet evening of the world. Conclusion. True worker with the Lord, he labors not for hire, co-partner in the sure reward, what can he more desire? Sometimes his eyes are dim, all signs he cannot spell, yet he endures as seeing him who is invisible. The work he ought is bliss, the highest thing to crave, and all his life is found in this memorial for his grave. A worker with the Lord, he sought no other name, and found therein enough reward, enough of fame. End of chapter 45. Chapter 46 of Brave Men and Women, Their Struggles, Failures, and Triumphs by Osgood E. Fuller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kristen Hand. Alvin S. Southworth, Crossing the Nubian Desert. This gentleman, a member of the American Geographical Society, has furnished in the columns of the Sunday magazine the following picture of his experience in crossing the most perilous of the African deserts. Those who have not actually undergone the hardships of African travel almost always believe that the most dangerous desert routes are found in the Great Sahara. Such is not the fact. The currency given to this popular delusion is doubtless due to the immensity of the arid waste extending from the Mediterranean to the Sudan, and which is deceptive in its imagined dangers because of its large area. All travelers who have made the transit of the Nubian Desert from Carrasco, situated between the first and second cataracts, southward across the burning sand of the Nubian Desert, a distance of 425 miles, concur in the statement that it is an undertaking unmatched in its severity and rigors by any like journey over the treeless and shrubless spaces of the earth. The flight of a Tartar tribe, as told by De Quincey, in his matchless descriptive style, carrying his readers with him through scenes of an almost unparalleled warfare, privation, and cruelty, until the remnant of the Asiatic band stands beneath the shadow of the Chinese wall to receive the welcome of their deliverer, but imperfectly portrays the physical suffering that must be endured in the solitude of the most dangerous of African deserts. Let me therefore briefly record my life in the Nubian Desert, at a time when I was filled with the hopes and ambitions which led Bruce, in the last century, to the fountains of the Blue Nile, and but a few years since guided Speke and Grant, Sir Samuel Baker, and Stanley to the great basin of the major river, and determined the general geography of the equatorial regions. It was in the middle of January, after a pleasant journey up the Nile from Lower Egypt, on board a luxuriously fitted-up dahabeah, that I arrived in Carrasco, a Nubian village about 1,000 miles from the Mediterranean. The ascent of the Nile was simply a prolonged feast in this comfortable sailing craft, with the panorama of imposing temples and gigantic ruins relieving the dreary monotony of the river banks. The valley of this ancient stream, from the first cataract, where it ceases to be navigable, to Cairo, is remarkable alone to the traveler for its vast structures and mausoleums. The sikas and shadoffs, which are employed to raise water from the river, in order that it may be used for irrigation, suggest that no improvement has been made in Egyptian farming for 4,000 years. But the smoke curling away from tall chimneys and the noise of busy machinery in the midst of extensive fields of sugar cane remind us that Egypt has become one of the greatest sugar-producing powers of the East. From the site of ancient Memphis to Carrasco, comprising about 6 degrees of latitude, the soil under cultivation rarely extends beyond the distance of a mile into the interior, while eastward and westward is one vast, uninhabited waste, the camping ground of the Bedouins, who roam from river to sea in predatory bands, leading otherwise aimless lives. Thinly populated, and now without the means of subsisting large communities, Upper Egypt can never become what it was when, as we are taught, the walls of Thebes enclosed 4 millions of people, and the Nile was bridged from shore to shore. Turning from this strange land, I encamped on the border of the Nubian Desert and prepared to set out on camelback toward the sources of the Nile. In conjunction with the local officials, I began the necessary preparations, which involved the selection of 42 camels, 3 donkeys, and 19 servants. My ample provision and preparation consisted of the camel's feed, durra and barley, stowed in plated saddlebags, filling the goatskins with water, each containing an average of 5 gallons. 80 were required for the journey. 3 sheep, a coop full of chickens, a desert range, a wall tent with the other supplies, made up over 10,000 pounds of baggage as our caravan, entering the northern door of the barren and dreary steppe, felt its way through a deep ravine paved with boulders, shifting sands, and dead camels. We soon left the bluffs and crag which form the barrier between the Nile and the desolate land beyond, and then indeed the real journey began. Our camp apparatus was quite simple, consisting of a few plates, knives and forks, blankets and rugs, a kitchen tent, and a pine table. And this outfit formed the nucleus of our nomadic village, not omitting the rough cooking utensils. I recall now one of these strange scenes in that distant region, under the cloudless sky, beneath the Southern Cross. A few feet distant from my canvas chateau was my aged Arab cook, manipulating his coals, his tongs, and preparing the hissing mutton, the savory pigeons, and potatoes. The cook is the most popular man on such an expedition, and is neither to be coaxed nor driven. The baggage camels were disposed upon the ground a few yards distant, eating their grain and uttering those loud, yelping, beseeching sounds, a compound of an elephant's trumpet and a lion's roar, which were taken up, repeated by the chorus, and re-echoed by the hills. These patient animals, denuded of their loads and water, the latter having been corded in mats, became quiet only with sleep. Add to these scenes and uproar the deafening volubility of 29 Arabs and Nubians, each shouting within the true barbaric key, the 7/8 nudity of the blacks, the elaborate and flashing wear of the upper servants, and the small asperities of this my menial world. All of these with a refreshing breeze, a clear atmosphere, the air laden with ozone and electric life, the sky inviting the serenest contemplation, with a great moon thrice magnified as it rose. And I recall an evening when I was supremely content. Piloted by the carcasses of decayed camels, we took up our route in the morning, led by our guide, and soon emerged on the sublimest scenery of the desert. Our line of travel lay through the center of grand elliptical amphitheaters, which called to mind the Colosseum at Rome and the exhumed arena at Pompeii. The eroded structures, wrought by the hand of nature at some remote period, were floored over by hard, gravelly sand, enclosed by lofty, semicircular sides, and vaulted only by the blue sky, and are among the grandest primitive formations I have ever seen. From the maroon shade of the sand to the dark, craggy appearance of the terraced rocks, there is as much variety as can be found in landscape without verdure and in solitude without civilization. These amphitheaters are linked together by narrow passages, and so perfect were the formations that 4 doorways, breaking the view into quadrants, were often seen. The view broadened and lengthened day by day until our journey lay through a plain of billowing sand. Then the sun grew fierce and intolerable. The lips began to crack, the eyebrows and mustache were burned to a light blonde, the skin peeled, and the tongue became parched, while the fine sand, ever present in the hot wind, left its deposits in the delicate membranes of the eye. It is thus that a period of 10 hours in the saddle day after day, under the scorching sun, takes the edge off the romance of travel, and calls to one's mind the green lawn, the sparkling fountains, and the beauties of a more tolerable zone. We were making about 30 miles a day, sleeping soundly at night, when the ever-watchful hyena and occasionally a troop of wild asses would pay us their nocturnal visits, and upon the 4th morning we began to approach the shores of the mirage seas. These atmospheric phenomena on the Nubian desert are not only very perfect imitations of real lakes, but have on many occasions inveigled expeditions away to perish of heat and thirst. A little time before my expedition to Central Africa, a body of Egyptian troops crossing this desert found their water almost at a boiling point in the skins, and nearly exhausted. They beheld, a few miles distant, an apparent lake overshadowed by a forest, and bordered with verdure and shrubbery. Although told by the guide that it was an illusion, they broke ranks, started off in pursuit of the sheet of water, chasing the aerial phantom, although it receded with the pace of their approach. At last they sunk down from thirst and fatigue and died. 12 hours on the Nubian desert without water means a certain and terrible death, and even to this day, having been near such an end, with all of its indescribable anguish, I seldom raise a glass of water to my lips that I do not recall a day when I lay upon the burning sand, awaiting with impatience the moment that should snap asunder the vital cord and give peace to my burning body. A mirage certainly presents an incomparable scenic effect. Once in its midst, you are encompassed by an imponderable mirror. It reflects the rocks, the mountains, the stray mimosa trees, and reproduces by inverted mirage every prominent object of the extended landscape. It has the blue of polished platinum and lies like a motionless sea, stretching away from the craggy bluffs. Sometimes during the noonday heat it dances within a few yards of the caravan and gives motion to every object within its area, changing the waste to the semblance of rolling seas, peopled with the semblance of men. Attacked by semi-blindness, with a blistering nose and lips almost sealed to speech because of the agony of attempted articulation, I found the 5th day brought me to the extreme of suffering, when a terrific simoon burst over the desert, gathering up and dispersing the sands with indescribable fury. My mouth and nostrils were filled with earthly atoms, and my eyes were filled with irritating particles. The storm grew so dense and awful that it became a tornado, and we were soon enveloped in total darkness. All routes of travel were obliterated, and destruction threatened my command. These sand spouts are frequent, making a clean swath, burying alike man and beast, and often they blow for weeks. During the approach of one of these death-dealing simoons, I noted a sublime phenomenon. To southward were fine equidistant sand spouts rising perpendicularly to a great height and losing their swelling capitals in the cloud. They seemed to stand as majestic columns supporting the vault of the sky, and the supernatural architecture was further heightened by mirage lakes, whose waters seemed to dash against the pillars as the green of doom palms waved through the colonnade. The spectacle appeared like the ruin of a supernatural pantheon once reared by the banks of the Nile, whose welcome in real waters greeted my eye after a 14 days' journey, which I trust I may never be called upon to repeat. End of chapter 46. Chapter 47 of Brave Men and Women, Their Struggles, Failures, and Triumphs by Osgood E. Fuller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kristen Hand. A forbidden topic, which some people persist in introducing. Why don't they stop it? Why do some people persist, spite of my hopes and prayers, my silent tears and protestations, in asking if I'm well, when I'm before their eyes apparently the personification of health? Why am I of that unfortunate class of beings who are afflicted with friends, heaven defend me from such friends, who appear to take a fiendish delight in recounting to me my real, or by them, imagined ill looks, who come into my presence and, scrutinizing me closely, inquire, with what looks to me like a shade of anxiety, "Are you sick?" And if I, in astonishment, echo, "Sick? Why, no, I never felt better in my life," observe with insulting mock humility, "Oh, excuse me, I thought you looked badly," and turn again to other subjects. But I do not flatter myself they are done with me. I know their evil working dispositions are far from satisfied, and presently they renew the attack by asking, still more obnoxiously, "My dear, are you sure you are quite well today? You certainly are pale." And if I, thus severely cross-questioned, am induced to admit, half sarcastically, and perhaps just to note the effect, that I have, as who has not, a little private ache somewhere here about me, that, by the way, I considered was only mine to bear, and therefore nobody's business but my own, and which may have been happily forgotten for a few moments, I have removed the barrier, given the opportunity desired, and the flood rushes in. "I knew you were not well," they cry triumphantly. "Your complexion is very sallow, your lips are pale, your eyes look dull and have dark rings under them, and surely you are thinner than when I saw you last." Concerning all which I may have doubts, though I have none that a frantic desire is taking possession of me to get away and investigate these charges, and when finally I am released from torture, I fly to my good friend, the mirror, and having obtained from it the blissful reassurance that these charges are without foundation in my features, I feel like girding on my armor and confronting my disagreeable ex-callers and all their kind with a few pertinent or impertinent questions. I want to ask them if it does them any particular good to go and sit in people's houses by the hour, watch their every look in action, and harrow up their feelings by such gratuitous information. I want to ask them if they suppose our eyesight is not so sharp as theirs. And I take great pleasure in informing them, and in politely and frigidly requesting them to remember, that so far as my observation goes, when people are ill or looking ill, they are not so blind, either to feelings or appearances, as not to have discovered the fact. That indeed, they must be exceptions to the general rule of half invalids if they do not frequently and critically examine every lineament of their face, and secretly grieve over their increasing imperfections. Consequently, you provokingly observant ones, when you meet them and find them not looking well, even find yourselves in doubt as to whether they are looking quite as well as when you last saw them, and are sure you shall perish unless you introduce what Emerson declares a forbidden topic in some form. At least give your friends the benefit of the doubt. Tell them they are looking better than usual, and my word for it, they will be by the time they hear that. For if there is anything that will make a person, especially a woman, look well and feel better, it is the knowledge that someone else thinks she does. But if she is thin, remember there is nothing fat-producing in your telling her of the fact. Or if her eyes are dull, they will not brighten at the certainty that you know it, unless with anger that your knowledge should be conveyed in such a fashion. And if she is pale, telling her of it will not bring the color to her face, unless it be a blush of shame for your heartless ill-breeding. So much for the class who appear purposely to wound one's feelings. Then there is another class who accomplish the same result with no such intention, who do it seemingly from pure thoughtlessness, but who should none the less be held accountable for their acts. One of these unlucky mortals, who would not willingly cause any one a single heartache, lately met a gentleman friend of ours, who is, 'tis true, and pity 'tis true, in very delicate health, and thus accosted him, "I tell you, my man, unless you do something for yourself right off, you won't be alive 3 months from now." Do something. As if he had not just returned from a 1,000-mile journey taken to consult one of the most eminent physicians in the country, to whom he paid a small fortune for services that saved his life, and as if he were not constantly trying everything he possibly can to help and save himself. Nevertheless, after this blunt prophecy, he did something more, something he is not in the habit of doing. He went home utterly miserable, related the circumstances to his wife, whose murderous inclinations towards his officious fellow-man were forgivable, assured her that were his appearance so horrifying to casual acquaintances, he must indeed be a doomed man, and, spite of her efforts, always directed to the contrary, got the blues, and, conscious of having done everything else, began contemplating death as the only remedy still untried. Now, to me, such carelessness seems criminal. The gentleman addressed was attending to his extensive business, was more cheerful than half the men who are considered in perfect health, and was, for him, really looking as well as feeling finely. And, to give him such startling intelligence when he was so totally unprepared for it, was inflicting misery upon him that one human being has no right to inflict upon another. He has no right to advise a friend to do an indefinite something, unless he knows what will help or cure him. He has no right to verbally notice his condition, and particularly when he meets him doing his duty in active business life. People should think before they speak, that if their friends or acquaintances are ill, for that very reason they are generally discouraged enough, and need all the gladsome aid and comfort those about them can possibly give, and it is their simple duty to give it. Said a mother to me once, when urging me to call upon her invalid daughter, "And when you come, do not tell her she looks badly. Tell her she looks better, and you hope soon to see her well. Everyone who comes in exclaims about her terrible aspect, and it drives me almost distracted to note its ill effect on her." "Why, how can people be so heedless?" cried I. "Do they not know that even truth is not to be spoken at all times? When I come, I'll give her joy, you may be sure." And I did, though my heart ached the while, for I feared all too truly her days on earth were numbered. but I had my reward in her changed happy countenance and the gratitude of her sorrowing mother. Therefore, if you are not the enviable possessor of one of those merry hearts that doeth good like a medicine, both to yourself and to those with whom you come in contact, at least avoid wounding these by dwelling upon their infirmities. Even should you see your friends in the last stages of a long illness, though their cheeks are terrifying in their hollowness, and their eyes resemble dark caverns with faint lights at the far ends, and all their other features prove them soon to be embraced by the King of Terrors, not only in sweet mercy's name do not speak of it, but unless compelled to do so, except by your softened tones, make no sign that you notice it. Remember, you cannot smooth their way to the tomb by descanting upon their poor emaciated bodies, and there is just a chance that they may recollect you a trifle more kindly when they have cast them off, like worn-out garments, if you now talk on pleasanter themes with which they are not already so grievously familiar. Gale Forrest in The Christian Union. Courtesy. The savour of our household talk, which earneth silent thanks, the glory of our daily walk among the busy ranks. Life's cleanly lubricating oil, in which a help is found, to make the wheels of common toil go lightly, swiftly round. Benevolence and grace of heart, that gives no needless pain, and pours a balm on every smart, till smiles appear again. End of chapter 47. Chapter 48 of Brave Men and Women, Their Struggles, Failures, and Triumphs by Osgood E. Fuller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kristen Hand. Ida Lewis Wilson, the Grace Darling of America. About 46 years ago, a story of English heroism stirred the heart of the world. Grace Darling was born at Bamborough, on the coast of Northumberland, in 1815, and died in 1842. Her father was the keeper of the Longstone Lighthouse, on one of the most exposed of the Farne Islands. On the night of September 6, 1838, the Forfarshire steamer, proceeding from Hull to Dundee, was wrecked on one of the crags of the Farne group. Of the 53 persons on board, 38 perished, including the captain and his wife. On the morning of the 7th, the survivors were discovered by Grace, clinging to the rocks and remnants of the vessel, in imminent danger of being washed off by the returning tide. Grace, with the assistance of her parents, but against their remonstrance, immediately launched a boat, and with her father succeeded in rescuing 9 of them, and 6 escaped by other means. Presents and admiration were showered upon her from all parts of the United Kingdom, and a public subscription to the amount of £700 was raised for her. Among the many poets who sang her praises was Wordsworth, in a poem of considerable length, of which the following is a passage. Among the dwellers in the silent fields the natural heart is touched, and public way and crowded street resound with ballad strains, inspired by one whose very name bespeaks favour divine, exalting human love, whom since her birth on bleak Northumbrian coast, known unto few, but prized as far as known, a single act endears to high and low, through the whole land, to manhood moved in spite of the world's freezing cares, to generous youth, to infancy that lisps her praise, to age whose eye reflects it, glistening through tears of generous admiration. Such true fame awaits her now, but verily good deeds do no imperishable record find, save in the roll of heaven, where hers may live, a theme for angels when they celebrate the high-souled virtues which forgetful earth has witnessed. These lines describe equally well Ida Lewis, the heroine of our own country, whose brave deeds have passed into the habit of a life. Ida Lewis Wilson, for she is now married, is the daughter of Hosea Lewis, who was formerly of the Revenue Service, became keeper of Lime Rock Lighthouse in the inner harbor of Newport, Rhode Island. The lighthouse is situated on one of the small rocks of limestone in that harbor, and is entirely surrounded by water. From her 13th year, Ida has resided on the rock. As the only means of connection with the city of Newport is by water, she early learned the use of oars. When she was about 15 years of age, she rescued from drowning 4 boys who had been thrown into the water by the upsetting of their boat near the lighthouse. During the winter of 1865 to 66, on one of the coldest days of that season, she rescued a soldier belonging to Fort Adams who was clinging to a skiff which had upset with him and become full of water. She lifted him out of the water into her own boat and carried him to the lighthouse. About this time, the duty of looking after the light depended on Ida and her mother, her father having become a hopeless cripple from paralysis. This charge they fulfilled in the most perfect manner, no light on the coast being more regularly or more perfectly attended to. It is a singular life to imagine, these 2 women living thus isolated from the rest of the world. The freedom of the life, however, and the constant abundance of stimulating sea air, together with the exercise of rowing to and from the city, gave Ida physical strength and a health which makes her richer in all the valuable part of life than many of her sex whose lives are passed in constant repining for something to live for, while surrounded with all the appliances of luxury. That Miss Lewis has also developed an independence of courage is shown by her deeds, which prove also that the isolation of her life has not in any way prevented the development of the tenderness of sympathy with suffering which is supposed to be peculiar to only the helplessness of women. It was owing to the efforts of the late Senator Burnside that Ida became the recognized keeper of the lighthouse, a promotion as graceful as it was deserved. The matter was arranged in January 1879 by Senator Burnside and Collector Pratt. The keeper of the Lime Rock Light then was Mrs. Zoraida Lewis, Ida's mother, who had been in charge for a number of years. Mrs. Lewis's second daughter, who was very sick, required all the mother's attention, and accordingly it was suggested to her that by her resignation the heroine could receive the appointment. She gladly accepted the suggestion, and on January 4th Ida received her appointment with a salary of $750 a year, an increase of $250 over her mother's pay. In communicating the appointment, Secretary Sherman said, "This appointment is conferred upon you as a mark of my appreciation for your noble and heroic efforts in saving human lives." Ida Lewis had given up all hope that her claims would ever be recognized, and the news was joyfully received. In July 1881, the Secretary of the Treasury awarded the Gold Life-Saving Medal to her in recognition of her services in rescuing a number of persons from drowning since the passage of the act authorizing such awards. Most of the rescues made were under circumstances which called for heroic daring and involved the risk of her life. The following summary of her achievements in life-saving is taken from the records of the Treasury Department. The total number of lives Mrs. Ida Lewis Wilson has saved since 1854, so far as known, is 13. In all these cases except 2, she has relied wholly on herself. Her latest achievement was a rescue in February 1881 of 2 bandsmen from Fort Adams near Newport, Rhode Island. The men were passing over the ice near Lime Rock Lighthouse, where Mrs. Lewis Wilson resides, when the ice gave way and they fell in. Hearing their cries, Mrs. Wilson ran out with a clothesline which she threw to them, successively hauling them out at a great risk to herself from the double peril of the ice giving way beneath her and of being pulled in. Her heroism on various occasions has won her the tribute of her state's legislature, expressed in an official resolution, the public presentation to her of a boat by the citizens of Newport, a testimonial in money from the officers and soldiers of Fort Adams for saving their comrades, and medals from the Massachusetts Humane Society and the New York Life-Saving Benevolent Association. To these offerings is now fitly added the Gold Medal of the United States Life-Saving Service. The presentation took place at the Custom House at Newport on October 11, 1881, in the presence of many of the leading residents of the state, who met there upon invitation of Collector Causers. Mrs. Wilson was introduced to the company by ex-Collector Macy. The collector introduced Lieutenant Commander F.E. Chadwick, U.S. Navy, who in a happy speech made the presentation of the highest token of merit of the kind which can be given in this country, the life-saving medal of the first class conferred by the United States government for extreme heroic daring involving eminent personal danger. After a simple and eloquent recital of the circumstances in which Mrs. Wilson had, at the risk of her own life and in circumstances requiring the utmost skill and daring, Save from a watery grave on 6 occasions, 13 persons, Commander Chadwick paid a glowing tribute to the heroism of Mrs. Wilson, and concluded by reading the letter of the Secretary of the Treasury, Wyndham, conferring the medal awarded to her under the law of June 20th, 1874. Lieutenant Governor Frey responded on behalf of Mrs. Wilson, and an appropriate address was made by the ex-Governor Van Zandt on behalf of Newport and Rhode Island. After the addresses, the public were invited to inspect the gold medal, and were greatly impressed with its beauty. It bears upon its obverse side a tablet with the following inscription: To Ida Lewis Wilson, for signal heroism in saving 2 men from drowning, February 4th, 1881. Surrounding the tablet is the inscription, in testimony of heroic deeds in saving life from the peril of the seas. End of chapter 48. Chapter 49 of Brave Men and Women, Their Struggles, Failures, and Triumphs by Osgood E. Fuller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kristen Hand. Rachel Jackson, born 1767, died 1828, the wife of our 7th president. Rachel Donaldson was the maiden name of General Jackson's wife. She was born in Virginia in the year 1767 and lived there until she was 11 years of age. Her father, Colonel John Donaldson, was a planter and land surveyor who possessed considerable wealth in land, cattle, and slaves. He was one of those hardy pioneers who were never content unless they were living away out in the woods, beyond the verge of civilization. Accordingly, in 1779, we find him near the headwaters of the Tennessee River with all his family, bound for the western part of Tennessee, with a river voyage of 2,000 miles before them. Seldom has a little girl of 11 years shared in so perilous an adventure. The party started in the depth of a severe winter, and battled for 2 months with the ice before it had fairly begun the descent of the Tennessee. But in the spring, accompanied by a considerable fleet of boats, the craft occupied by John Donaldson and his family floated down the winding stream more rapidly. Many misfortunes befell them. Sometimes a boat would get aground and remain immovable till its whole cargo was landed. Sometimes a boat was dashed against a projecting point and sunk. One man died of his frozen feet. 2 children were born. On board one boat, containing 28 persons, the smallpox raged. As this boat always sailed at a certain distance behind the rest, it was attacked by Indians, who captured it, killed all the men, carried off the women and children. The Indians caught the smallpox, of which some hundreds died in the course of the season. But during this voyage, which lasted several months, no misfortune befell the boat of Colonel Donaldson, and he and his family, including his daughter Rachel, arrived safely at the site of the present city of Nashville, near which he selected his land, built his log house, and established himself. Never has a settlement been so infested by hostile Indians as this. When Rachel Donaldson, with her sisters and young friends, went blackberrying, a guard of young men, with their rifles loaded and cocked, stood guard over the surrounding thickets while the girls picked the fruit. It was not safe for a man to stoop over a spring to drink unless someone else was on the watch with his rifle in his arms. And when 6 men stood together, in conversation, they turned their backs to each other, all facing different ways, to watch for a lurking savage. So the Donaldsons lived for 8 years and gathered about them more Negroes, more cattle, and more horses than any other household in the settlement. During one of the long winters, when a great tide of immigration had reduced the stock of corn and threatened the neighborhood with famine, Colonel Donaldson moved to Kentucky with all his family and dependents, and there lived until the corn crop at Nashville was gathered. Rachel, by this time, had grown to be a beautiful and vigorous young lady, well skilled in all the arts of the backwoods, and a remarkably bold and graceful rider. She was a plump little damsel with the blackest hair and eyes, and of a very cheerful and friendly disposition. During the temporary residence of her father in Kentucky, she gave her hand and heart to one Louis Robards, and her father returned to Nashville without her. Colonel Donaldson, soon after, while in the woods surveying far from his home, fell by the hand of an assassin. He was found pierced by bullets, but whether they were fired by red savages or by white was never known. To comfort her mother in her loneliness, Rachel and her husband came to Nashville and lived with her, intending, as soon as the Indians were subdued, to occupy a farm of their own. In the year 1788, Andrew Jackson, a young lawyer from North Carolina, arrived at Nashville to enter upon the practice of his profession, and went to board with Mrs. Donaldson. He soon discovered that Mrs. Rachel Robards lived most unhappily with her husband, who was a man of violent temper and most jealous disposition. Young Jackson had not long resided in the family before Mr. Robards began to be jealous of him, and many violent scenes took place between them. The jealous Robards at length abandoned his wife and went off to his old home in Kentucky, leaving Jackson master of the field. A rumor soon after reached the place that Robards had procured a divorce from his wife in the legislature of Virginia, soon after which Andrew Jackson and Rachel Donaldson were married. The rumor proved to be false, and they lived together for 2 years before a divorce was really granted, at the end of which time they were married again. This marriage, though so inauspiciously begun, was an eminently happy one, although, out of doors, it caused the irascible Jackson a great deal of trouble. The peculiar circumstances attending the marriage caused many calumnies to be uttered and printed respecting Mrs. Jackson, and some of the bitterest quarrels which the general had ever had their origin in them. At home, however, he was one of the happiest of men. His wife was an excellent manager of a household and a kind mistress of slaves. She had a remarkable memory, and delighted to relate anecdotes and tales of the early settlement of the country. Daniel Boone had been one of her father's friends, and she used to recount his adventures and escape. Her abode was a seat of hospitality, and she well knew how to make her guests feel at home. It used to be said in Tennessee that she could not write, but, "As I have had the pleasure of reading 9 letters in her own handwriting," says Parton, "one of which was 8 pages long, I presume I have a right to deny the imputation. It must be confessed, however, that the spelling was exceedingly bad, and that the writing was so much worse as to be nearly illegible. If she was ignorant of books, she was most learned in the lore of the forest, the dairy, the kitchen, and the farm. I remember walking about a remarkably fine spring that gushed from the earth near where her dairy stood, and hearing one of her colored servants say that there was nothing upon the estate which she valued so much as that spring. She grew to be a stout woman, which made her appear shorter than she really was. Her husband, on the contrary, was remarkably tall and slender, so that when they danced a reel together, which they often did with all the vigor of the olden time, the spectacle was extremely curious. It was a great grief to both husband and wife that they had no children, and it was to supply this want in the household that they adopted one of Mrs. Donaldson's nephews and named him Andrew Jackson. This boy was the delight of them both as long as they lived. Colonel Benton, so long in the United States Senate, himself a pioneer of the still remoter West, who knew Mrs. Jackson well and long, recorded his opinion of her in the following forcible language. A more exemplary woman in all the relations of life, wife, friend, mother, mistress of slaves, never lived, and never presented a more quiet, cheerful, and admirable management of her household. She had the general's own warm heart, frank manners, and admirable temper, and no 2 persons could have been better suited to each other, lived more happily together, or made a house more attractive to visitors. No bashful youth or plain old man, whose modesty sat them down at the lower end of the table, could escape her cordial attention, any more than the titled gentlemen at her right and left. Young persons were her delight, and she always had her house filled with them, all calling her affectionately Aunt Rachel. In the homely fashion of the time, she used to join her husband and guests in smoking a pipe after dinner and in the evening. There are now living many persons who well remember seeing her smoking by her fireside a long reed pipe. When General Jackson went forth to fight in the War of 1812, he was still living in a log house of 4 rooms. And this house, says Parton, in a sketch written years ago, from which this is chiefly drawn, is still standing on his beautiful farm 10 miles from Nashville. I used to wonder, when walking about it, how it was possible for Mrs. Jackson to accommodate so many guests as we know she did. But a hospitable house, like a 3rd Avenue car, is never full, and in that mild climate the young men could sleep on the piazza or in the corn crib, content if their mothers and sisters had the shelter of the house. It was not until long after the general's return from the wars that he built, or could afford to build, the large brick mansion which he named the Hermitage. The visitor may still see in that commodious house the bed on which this happy pair slept and died, the furniture they used, and the pictures on which they were accustomed to look. In the hall of the second story there is still preserved the huge chest in which Mrs. Jackson used to stow away the woolen clothes of the family in the summer to keep them from the moths. Around the house are the remains of the fine garden of which she used to be proud, and a little beyond are the cabins of the 150 slaves, to whom she was more a mother than a mistress. A few weeks after the Battle of New Orleans, when Jackson was in the first flush of his triumph, this plain planter's wife floated down the Mississippi to New Orleans to visit her husband and accompany him home. She had never seen a city before, for Nashville at that day was little more than a village. The elegant ladies of New Orleans were exceedingly pleased to observe that General Jackson, though he was himself one of the most grateful and polite of gentlemen, seemed totally unconscious of the homely bearing, the country manners, and awkward dress of his wife. In all companies and on all occasions he showed her every possible mark of respect. The ladies gathered about her and presented her with all sorts of showy knickknacks and jewelry, and one of them undertook the task of selecting suitable clothes for her. She frankly confessed that she knew nothing at all about such things, and was willing to wear anything the ladies thought proper. Much as she enjoyed her visit, she was glad enough to return to her old home on the banks of the Cumberland, and resume her oversight of the dairy and the plantation. Soon after the peace, a remarkable change came over the spirit of this excellent woman. Parson Blackburn, as the general always called him, was a favorite preacher in that part of Tennessee, and his sermons made so powerful an impression on Mrs. Jackson that she joined the Presbyterian Church, and was ever after devotedly religious. The general himself was almost persuaded to follow her example. He did not, however, but he testified his sympathy with his wife's feelings by building a church for her, a curious little brick edifice, on his own farm, the smallest church, perhaps, in the United States. It looks like a very small schoolhouse. It has no steeple, no portico, and but one door, and the interior, which contains 40 little pews, is unpainted, and the floor is of brick. On Sundays, the congregation consisted chiefly of the general, his family, and half a dozen neighbors, with as many Negroes as the house would hold, and could see through the windows. It was just after the completion of this church that General Jackson made his famous reply to a young man who objected to the doctrine of future punishment. "I thank God," said this youth, "I have too much good sense to believe there is such a place as hell." "Well, sir," said General Jackson, "I thank God there is such a place." "Why, General," asked the young man, "what do you want with such a place of torment as hell?" To which the general replied, as quick as lightning, "To put such rascals as you are in, that oppose and vilify the Christian religion." The young man said no more, and soon after found it convenient to take his leave. Mrs. Jackson did not live to see her husband President of the United States, though she lived long enough to know that he was elected to that office. When the news was brought to her of her husband's election in December 1828, she quietly said, "Well, for Mr. Jackson's sake," she always called him Mr. Jackson, "I am glad. For my own part, I never wished it." The people of Nashville, proud of the success of their favorite, resolved to celebrate the event by a great banquet on the 22nd of December, the anniversary of the day on which the general had first defeated the British below New Orleans, and some of the ladies of Nashville were secretly preparing a magnificent wardrobe for the future mistress of the White House. 6 days before the day appointed for the celebration, Mrs. Jackson, while busied about her household affairs in the kitchen of the Hermitage, suddenly shrieked, placed her hands upon her heart, sank upon a chair, and fell forward into the arms of one of her servants. She was carried to her bed, where for the space of 60 hours she suffered extreme agony, during the whole of which her husband never left her side for 10 minutes. Then she appeared much better and recovered the use of her tongue. This was only 2 days before the day of the festival, and the first use she made of her recovered speech was to implore her husband to go to another room and sleep, so as to recruit his strength for the banquet. He would not leave her, however, but lay down upon a sofa and slept a little. The evening of the 22nd she appeared to be so much better that the general consented, after much persuasion, to sleep in the next room, and leave his wife in the care of the doctor and 2 of his most trusted servants. At 9 o'clock he bade her good night, went to the next room, and took off his coat, preparatory to lying down. When he had been gone 5 minutes from her room, Mrs. Jackson, who was sitting up, suddenly gave a long, loud, inarticulate cry, which was immediately followed by the death rattle in her throat. By the time her husband had reached her side, she had breathed her last. "Bleed her," cried the general, but no blood flowed from her arm. "Try the temple, doctor." A drop or two of blood stained her cap, but no more followed. Still, it was long before he would believe her dead, and when there could no longer be any doubt, and they were preparing a table upon which to lay her out, he cried with a choking voice, "Spread 4 blankets upon it, for if she does come to, she will lie so hard upon the table." All night long he sat in the room, occasionally looking into her face, and feeling if there was any pulsation in her heart. The next morning, when one of his friends arrived just before daylight, he was nearly speechless and utterly inconsolable, looking 20 years older. There was no banquet that day in Nashville. On the morning of the funeral, the grounds were crowded with people who saw with emotion the poor old general supported to the grave between 2 of his old friends, scarcely able to stand. The remains were interred in the garden of the Hermitage, in a tomb which the general had recently completed. The tablet which covers her dust contains the following inscription: "Here lie the remains of Mrs. Rachel Jackson, wife of President Jackson, who died the 22nd of December, 1828, aged 61. Her face was fair, her person pleasing, her temper amiable, her heart kind. She delighted in relieving the wants of her fellow creatures, and cultivated that divine pleasure by the most liberal and unpretending methods. To the poor she was a benefactor, to the rich an example, to the wretched a comforter, to the prosperous an ornament. Her piety went hand in hand with her benevolence, and she thanked her Creator for being permitted to do good. A being so gentle and so virtuous, slander might wound but not dishonor. Even death, when he tore her from the arms of husband, could but transport to the bosom of her God." Andrew Jackson was never the same man again. During his presidency he never used the phrase, "by the eternal," nor any other language which could be considered profane. He mourned his wife until he himself rejoined her in the tomb he had prepared for them both. Of all the blessed things below, to hint the joys above, there is not one our hearts may know, so dear as mated love. It walks the garden of the Lord, it gives itself away. To give and think not of reward is glory day by day. And though sometimes the shadows fall, and day is dark as night, it bows and drinks the cup of gall, but gives not up the fight. For one is in the union where the mine is ever thine, whose presence keeps it brave and fair, a melody divine. End of chapter 49. Chapter 50 of Brave Men and Women, Their Struggles, Failures, and Triumphs by Osgood E. Fuller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kristen Hand. Discontented Girls. One panacea for them, and one refuge. Not every girl is discontented, nor are any wretched all the time. If they were, our homes would lose much sunshine. Certainly no class in the community is so constantly written about, talked at, and preached to as our girls, and still there always seems to be room left for one word more. I am persuaded that the leaven of discontent pervades girls of the several social ranks, from the fair daughter of a cultured home to her who has grown up in a crowded tenement, her highest ambition to dress like the young ladies she sees on the fashionable avenue. City girls and country girls alike know the meaning of this discontent, which sometimes amounts to morbidness, and again only to nervous irritability. I once knew and marveled at a young person who spent her languid existence idly lounging in a rocking chair, eating candy and reading novels, whilst her mother bustled about, provoking by her activity an occasional remonstrance from her indolent daughter. "Do, Ma, keep still," she would say, with amiable wonder at Ma's notable ways. This incarnation of sweet selfishness was hateful in my eyes, and I have often queried, in the 20 years which have passed since I saw her, what sort of woman she made. As a girl she was vexatious, though no ripple of annoyance crossed the white brow, no frown obscured it, and no flurry of impatience ever tossed the yellow curls. She had no aspirations which candy and a rocking chair could not gratify. It is not so with girls of a larger mind and greater vitality. The girls, for instance, in our own neighborhood, whom we have known since they were babies. Many of them feel very much dissatisfied with life and do not hesitate to say so. And strangely enough, the accident of a collegiate or common school education makes little difference in their conclusions. To what end, says the former, have I studied hard and widened my resources? I might have been a society girl and had a good time and been married and settled some time without going just far enough to find out what pleasure there is in study and then stopping short. I am quoting from what girls have said to me, girls who have been graduated with distinction and whose parents preferred that they should neither teach nor paint, nor enter upon a profession, nor engage in any paid work. Polished after the similitude of a palace, what should the daughters do except stay at home to cheer father and mother, play and sing in the twilight, read, shop, sew, visit, receive their friends, and be young women of elegant leisure? If love and love's climax, the wedding march, follows soon upon a girl's leaving school, she is taken out of the ranks of girlhood, and in accepting women's highest vocation, queenship in the kingdom of home, forgoes the ease of her girlish life and its peril of ennui and unhappiness together. This, however, is the fate of the minority, and while young people continue, as thousands do, to dread beginning home life upon small means, it must so remain. Education is not a fetish, though some who ought to know better regard it in that superstitious light. No amount of school training, dissevered from religious culture and from that development of the heart and of the conscience without which intellectual wealth is poverty, will lift anybody, make anybody happier or better, or fit anybody for blithe living in this shadowy world. I have no doubt that there are numbers of girls whose education, having made them objects of deep respect to their simple fathers and mothers, has also gone far to make the old home intolerable, the home ways distasteful, and the old people, alas, subjects of secret deprecating scorn. A girl has, indeed, eaten of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, when her eyes are opened in such wise that she is ashamed of her plain, honorable, old-fashioned parents, or if not ashamed, is still willing to let them retire to the background while she shines in the front. I did not write this article for the purpose of saying what I hold to be the bounden duty of every father and mother in the land, viz., to educate the daughter as they educate the son, to some practical bread-winning pursuit. That should be the rule, and not the exception. A girl should be trained so that, with either head or hands, as art or artisan, in some way or other, she will be able to go into the world's market with something for which the world, being shrewd and knowing what it wants, will pay in cash. Rich or poor, the American father who fails to give his daughter this special training is a short-sighted and cruel man. My thought was rather of the girls themselves. Some of them will read this. So will some of their mothers. Mothers and daughters often, not invariably, are so truly en rapport that their mutual comprehension is without a flaw. There are homes in which, with the profoundest regard and the truest tenderness on both sides, they do not understand each other. The mother either sees the daughter's discontent, recognizes and resents it, or fails to see it, would laugh at its possibility, and pity the sentimentalist who imagined it. And there are dear, blooming, merry-hearted, clear-eyed young women who are as gay and as elastic as bird on bough or flower in field. To discontented girls, I would say, there is for you one panacea, work, and there is one refuge, Christ. Have you been told this before? Do you say that you can find no work worth the doing? Believe me, if not in your own home, you need go no further than your own set, your own street, your own town, to discover it waiting for you. No one else can do it so well. Perhaps no one else can do it at all. The girl cannot be unhappy who without reserve and with full surrender consecrates herself to Christ, for then she will have work enough. Margaret E. Sangster. God giveth his beloved rest through action, which reacheth for the dream of joy on earth. Inertness brings the heart no satisfaction, but condemnation and the sense of dearth. And shall the dream of life, the quenchless yearning for something which is yet beyond control, the flame within the breast forever burning, not leap to action and exalt the soul. Surmount all barriers to brave endeavor, make for itself a way where it would go, and flash the crown of ecstasy forever, which only laborers with God may know. In action there is joy which is no fiction, the hope of something as in faith begun, God's sweet and everlasting benediction, the flush of victory and labor done. Labor puts on the livery of greatness, while genius idle withers from the sight, and in its triumph takes no note of lateness, for time exists not in eternal light. End of chapter 50. Chapter 51 of Brave Men and Women, Their Struggles, Failures, and Triumphs by Osgood E. Fuller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kristen Hand. The voice in Ramah. Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted, because they were not. We have heard the voice in Ramah, the grief in the days of yore, when the beautiful flowers of the martyrs went to bloom on another shore. The light of our life is darkness, and with sorrow we are not done. For thine is the bitterest mourning, mourning for an only son. And what shall I utter to comfort the heart that is dearest of all? Too young for the losses and crosses, too young for the rise and the fall. Oh yes, we own it, but not too young for the grace that was so nameless and blameless, for the yearning and tender embrace. He hung on thy bosom in that happiest, weariest hour, a dear little bird to its blossom, the beautiful, dutiful flower. And thus he grew by its sweetness so, that smile unto smile responded, but a little while ago. And you and I were happy, in many a vision fair, of a ripe and glorious manhood which the world and we should share. In a little while the patter of 2 little feet was heard, and many a look it cheered us, a look that was more than a word. In a little while he uttered the words we longed to hear, and Mama and Papa blessed him with a blessing of hope and fear. In a little while he budded, a bud of the promising spring, and oh for the beautiful blossom, and oh for the fruit it will bring. The joy they never may know it, who never have parents been, the joy of a swelling bosom with a glowing light within. A light that is soft and tender, and growing in strength and grace, which wreathes a form that is slender, and glows in a dear little face. But life it knoweth the shadow as well as the shine. For the one it follows the other, and both together are thine. For the bud it never unfolded, the light it flickered away, and whose is the power to utter the grief of that bitterest day? His form is yet before me, with the fair and lofty brow, and the day since last we kissed it, is it long since then and now? Dearest, it seems but a minute, though winter has spread the snow, meek purity's mantle to cover the one that is resting below. In the acre of God that is yonder, and unto the west his head, he sleepeth the sleep untroubled, with one to watch at his bed. For the bright and guardian angel, who beholdeth the Father's face, doth stand as a sentinel watching o'er the dear one's resting place, doth stand as a sentinel guarding the dust of the precious dead, till at length the trumpet soundeth, when the years of the world are sped. And the throng which cannot be numbered put on their garments of white, and gird themselves for the glory of a realm that hath no night. And so he is gone, the darling, and the dream so fair and vain, whose light has faded to darkness, we shall never dream again. Never? Is the earth the limit to bright and beautiful hope? If the world brings not fruition, must we in the darkness grope? Oh no! There is expectation which the grave cannot control. There is boundless infinite promise for the living and deathless soul. And the darling who left us early may yonder grow a man. In deeds of the great hereafter, he may take his place in the van. Oh, if thine is the bitterest mourning, mourning for an only son, believe that in God the giver, our darling his course begun. Believe that in God the taker, his course forever will be, for this is the blessed comfort, the comfort for thee and me. Yea, this is the blessed comfort in sorrow like that of yore, when the beautiful flowers of the martyrs went to bloom on another shore. End of chapter 51. Chapter 52 of Brave Men and Women, Their Struggles, Failures, and Triumphs by Osgood E. Fuller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kristen Hand. LaFayette. Born 1757. Died 1834. The friend and defender of liberty on 2 continents. In the year 1730 there appeared in Paris a little volume entitled Philosophic Letters, which proved to be one of the most influential books produced in modern times. It was written by Voltaire, who was then 36 years of age, and contained the results of his observations upon the English nation, in which he had resided for 2 years. Paris was then as far from London, for all practical purposes, as New York now is from Calcutta, so that when Voltaire told his countrymen of the freedom that prevailed in England, of the tolerance given to religious sects, of the honors paid to untitled merit, of Newton, buried in Westminster Abbey with almost regal pomp, of Addison, Secretary of State, and Swift, familiar with prime ministers, and of the general liberty, happiness, and abundance of the kingdom, France listened in wonder as to a new revelation. The work was, of course, immediately placed under the ban by the French government, and the author exiled, which only gave it increased currency and deeper influence. This was the beginning of the movement which produced at length the French Revolution of 1787, and which has continued until France is now blessed with a free and constitutional government. It began among the higher classes of the people, for at that day not more than 1/3 of the French could read at all, and a much smaller fraction could read such a book as the Philosophic Letters, and the books which it called forth. Republicanism was fashionable in the drawing rooms of Paris for many years before the mass of the people knew what the word meant. Among the young noblemen who were early smitten in the midst of despotism with the love of liberty was the Marquis de Lafayette, born in 1757. Few families in Europe could boast a greater antiquity than his. A century before the discovery of America, we find the Lafayettes spoken of as an ancient house, and in every generation at least one member of the family had distinguished himself by his services to the king. This young man, coming upon the stage of life when republican ideas were teeming in every cultivated mind, embraced them with all the ardor of youth and intelligence. At 16 he refused a high post in the household of one of the princes of the blood and accepted a commission in the army. At the age of 17 he was married to the daughter of a duke, whose dowry added a considerable fortune to his own ample possessions. She was an exceedingly lovely woman and tenderly attached to her husband, and he was as fond of her as such a boy could be. The American Revolution broke out. In common with all the high-born Republicans of his time, his heart warmly espoused the cause of the revolted colonies, and he immediately conceived the project of going to America and fighting under her banner. He was scarcely 19 years of age when he sought an interview with Silas Deane, the American envoy, and offered his services to the Congress. Mr. Deane, it appears, objected to his youth. "When," says he, "I presented to the envoy my boyish face, I spoke more of my ardor in the cause than of my experience. But I dwelt much upon the effect my departure would have in France, and he signed our mutual agreement." His intention was concealed from all his family and from all his friends except 2 or 3 confidants. While he was making preparation for his departure, most distressing and alarming news came from America. The retreat from Long Island, the loss of New York, the Battle of White Plains, and the retreat through New Jersey. The American forces, it was said, reduced to a disheartened band of 3,000 militia, were pursued by a triumphant army of 33,000 English and Hessians. The credit of the colonies at Paris sank to the lowest ebb, and some of the Americans themselves confessed to Lafayette that they were discouraged, and tried to persuade him to abandon his project. He said to Mr. Dean, "Until now, sir, you have only seen my ardor in your cause, and that may not at present prove wholly useless. I shall purchase a ship to carry out your officers. We must feel confident in the future, and it is especially in the hour of danger that I wish to share your fortune." He proceeded at once with all possible secrecy to raise the money and to purchase and arm a ship. While the ship was getting ready, in order the better to conceal his intention, he made a journey to England, which had previously been arranged by his family. He was presented to the British king, against whom he was going to fight. He dined at the house of the minister who had the Department of the Colonies. He visited Lord Rawdon, afterwards distinguished in the Revolutionary struggle. He saw at the opera Sir Henry Clinton, whom he next saw on the battlefield of Monmouth, and he breakfasted with Lord Shelburne, a friend of the colonies. While I concealed my intentions, he tells us, I openly avowed my sentiments. I often defended the Americans. I rejoiced at their success at Trenton, and it was my spirit of opposition that obtained for me an invitation to breakfast with Lord Shelburne. On his return to France, his project was discovered, and his departure forbidden by the king. He sailed, however, in May 1777, cheered by his countrymen, and secretly approved by the government itself. On arriving at Philadelphia, he sent to Congress a remarkably brief epistle to the following effect. "After my sacrifices, I have the right to ask two favors. One is to serve at my own expense, the other to begin to serve as a volunteer." Congress immediately named him a Major General of the American Army, and he at once reported himself to General Washington. His services at the Brandywine, where he was badly wounded, in Virginia, where he held an important command, at Monmouth, where he led the attack, are sufficiently well known. When he had been in America about 15 months, the news came of the impending declaration of war between France and England. He then wrote to Congress that as long as he had believed himself free, he had gladly fought under the American flag, but that his own country being at war, he owed it the homage of his service, and he desired their permission to return home. He hoped, however, to come back to America, and asserted then that wherever he went, he should be a zealous friend of the United States. Congress gave him leave of absence, voted him a sword, and wrote a letter on his behalf to the King of France. "We recommend this noble young man," said the letter of Congress, "to the favor of your Majesty, because we have seen him wise in council, brave in battle, and patient under the fatigues of war." He was received in France with great distinction, which he amusingly describes. "When I went to court, which had hitherto only written for me orders for my arrest, I was presented to the ministers. I was interrogated, complimented, and exiled to the hotel where my wife was residing. Some days after, I wrote to the king to acknowledge my fault. I received in reply a light reprimand and the colonelcy of the Royal Dragoons. Consulted by all the ministers, and, what was much better, embraced by all the women, I had at Versailles the favor of the king and celebrity of Paris." In the midst of his popularity, he thought always of America, and often wished that the cost of the banquets bestowed upon him could be poured into the treasury of Congress. His favorite project at that time was the invasion of England, Paul Jones to command the fleet, and he himself the army. When this scheme was given up, he joined all his influence with that of Franklin to induce the French government to send to America a powerful fleet and a considerable army. When he had secured the promise of this valuable aid, he returned to America and served again in the armies of the young republic. The success of the United States so confirmed him in his attachment to republican institutions that he remained their devoted adherent and advocate as long as he lived. "May this revolution," said he once to Congress, "serve as a lesson to oppressors and as an example to the oppressed." And in one of his letters from the United States occurs this sentence: "I have always thought that a king was at least a useless being. Viewed from this side of the ocean, a king cuts a poor figure indeed." By the time he had left America at the close of the war, he had expended in the service of Congress 700,000 francs, a free gift to the cause of liberty. One of the most pleasing circumstances of Lafayette's residence in America was the affectionate friendship which existed between himself and General Washington. He looked up to Washington as to a father as well as a chief, and Washington regarded him with a tenderness truly paternal. Lafayette named his eldest son George Washington, and never omitted any opportunity to testify his love and admiration for the illustrious American. Franklin, too, was much attached to the youthful enthusiast, and privately wrote to General Washington, asking him, for the sake of the young and anxious wife of the Marquis, not to expose his life except in an important and decisive engagement. In the diary of the celebrated William Wilberforce, who visited Paris soon after the peace, there is an interesting passage descriptive of Lafayette's demeanor at the French court. He seemed to be the representative of the democracy in the very presence of the monarch, the tribune intruding with his veto within the chamber of the patrician order. His own establishment was formed upon the English model, and amidst the gaiety and ease of Fontainebleau, he assumed an air of a republican austerity. When the fine ladies of the court would attempt to drag him to the card table, he shrugged his shoulders with an air of affected contempt for the customs and amusements of the old regime. Meanwhile, the deference which this champion of the new state of things received, above all from the ladies of the court, intimated clearly the disturbance of the social atmosphere and presaged the coming tempest. From the close of the American War for Independence to the beginning of the French Revolution, a period of 6 years elapsed, during which France suffered much from the exhaustion of her resources in aiding the Americans. Lafayette lived at Paris, openly professing republicanism, which was then the surest passport to the favor both of the people and the court. The Queen of France herself favored the Republican party, though without understanding its object or tendencies. Lafayette naturally became the organ and spokesman of those who desired a reform in the government. He recommended, even in the palace of the king, a restoration of civil rights to the Protestants, the suppression of the heavy and odious tax on salt, the reform of the criminal courts, and he denounced the waste of public money on princes and court favorites. The Assembly of the Notables convened in 1787 to consider the state of the kingdom. Lafayette was its most distinguished and trusted member, and it was he who demanded a convocation of the representatives of all the departments of France, for the purpose of devising a permanent remedy for the evils under which France was suffering. "What, sir," said one of the royal princes to Lafayette, "do you really demand the assembling of a general congress of France?" "Yes, my lord," replied Lafayette, "and more than that." Despite the opposition of the court, this memorable congress met in Paris in 1789, and Lafayette represented in it the nobility of his province. It was he who presented the Declaration of Rights, drawn upon the model of those with which he had been familiar in America, and it was finally adopted. It was he also who made the ministers of the crown responsible for their acts and for the consequences of their acts. When this National Assembly was declared permanent, Lafayette was elected its vice president, and it was in that character that after the taking of the Bastille, he went to the scene at the head of a deputation of 60 members to congratulate the people upon their triumph. The next day a city guard was organized to preserve the peace of Paris, and the question arose in the Assembly who should command it. The president arose and pointed to the bust of Lafayette, presented by the state of Virginia to the city of Paris. The hint was sufficient, and Lafayette was elected to the post by acclamation. He called his citizen soldiers by the name of National Guards, and he distinguished them by a tricolored cockade, and all Paris immediately fluttered with tricolored ribbons and badges. "This cockade," said Lafayette as he presented one to the National Assembly, "will make the tour of the world." From the time of his acceptance of the command of the National Guard, the course of Lafayette changed its character, and the change became more and more marked as the Revolution proceeded. Hitherto he had been chiefly employed in rousing the sentiment of liberty in the minds of his countrymen, but now that the flame threatened to become a dangerous conflagration, it devolved upon him to stay its ravages. It was a task beyond human strength, but he most gallantly accepted it. On some occasions he rescued with his own hands the victims of the popular fury, and arrested the cockaded assassins who would have destroyed them. But even his great popularity was ineffectual to prevent the massacre of innocent citizens, and more than once, overwhelmed with grief and disgust, he threatened to throw up his command. On that celebrated day when 60,000 of the people of Paris poured in a tumultuous flood into the Park of Versailles and surrounded the palace of the king, Lafayette was compelled to join the throng in order, if possible, to control its movements. He arrived in the evening and spent the whole night in posting the National Guard about the palace and taking measures to secure the safety of the royal family. At the dawn of the day he threw himself upon the bed for a few minutes' repose. Suddenly the alarm was sounded. Some infuriated men had broken into the palace, killed 2 of the king's bodyguard, and rushed into the bedchamber of the queen, a minute or two after she had escaped from it. Lafayette ran to the scene, followed by some of the National Guard, and found all the royal family assembled in the king's chamber, trembling for their lives. Beneath the window of the apartment was a roaring sea of upturned faces, scarcely kept back by a thin line of National Guards. Lafayette stepped out upon the balcony and tried to address the crowd, but could not make himself heard. He then led out upon the balcony the beautiful Queen Marie Antoinette and kissed her hand, then seizing one of the bodyguard, embraced him and placed his own cockade on the soldier's hat. At once the temper of the multitude was changed, and the cry burst forth, "Long live the general! Long live the queen! Long live the bodyguard!" It was immediately announced that the king would go with the people to Paris, which had the effect of completely allaying their passions. During the long march of 10 miles, Lafayette rode close to the door of the king's carriage and thus conducted him in the midst of the tramping crowd in safety to the Tuileries. When the royal family was once more secure within its walls, one of the ladies, the daughter of the late king, threw herself in the arms of Lafayette, exclaiming, "General, you have saved us." From this moment dates the decline of Lafayette's popularity, and his actions, moderate and wise, continually lessened it. He demanded as a member of the National Assembly that persons accused of treason should be fairly tried by a jury, and he exerted all his power, while giving a constitution to his country, to preserve the monarchy. To appease the suspicions of the people that the king meditated a flight from Paris, he declared that he would answer with his head for the king's remaining. When, therefore, in June 1791, the king and queen made their blundering attempt to escape, Lafayette was immediately suspected of having secretly aided it. Danton cried out at the Jacobin Club, "We must have the person of the king or the head of the commanding general." It was in vain that after the king's return he ceased to pay him royal honors. Nothing could remove the suspicions of the people. Indeed, he still openly advised the preservation of the monarchy, and when a mob demanded the suppression of the royal power and threatened violence to the National Guard, the general, after warning them to disperse, ordered the troops to fire, an action which totally destroyed his popularity and influence. Soon after, he resigned his commission and his seat in the Assembly and withdrew to one of his country seats. He was not long allowed to remain in seclusion. The allied dynasties of Europe, justly alarmed at the course of the events in Paris, threatened the new republic with war. Lafayette was appointed to command one of the 3 armies gathered to defend the frontiers. While he was disciplining his troops and preparing to defend the country, he kept an anxious eye upon Paris, and saw with ever-increasing alarm the prevalence of the savage element in the national politics. In 1792, he had the boldness to write a letter to the National Assembly, demanding the suppression of the clubs, and the restoration of the king to the place and power assigned him by the Constitution. Learning soon after the new outrages put upon the king, he suddenly left his army and appeared before the bar of the Assembly, accompanied by a single aide-de-camp. There he renewed his demands amid the applause of the moderate members, but a member of the opposite party adroitly asked, "Is the enemy conquered? Is the country delivered since General Lafayette is in Paris?" "No," replied he, "the country is not delivered, the situation is unchanged, and nevertheless the general of one of our armies is in Paris." After a stormy debate, the Assembly declared that he had violated the Constitution in making himself the organ of an army legally incapable of deliberating, and had rendered himself amenable to the Minister of War for leaving his post without permission. Repulsed thus by the Assembly, coldly received at court, and rejected by the National Guard, he returned to his army, despairing of the country. There he made one more attempt to save the king by inducing him to come to his camp and fight for his throne. This project being rejected, and the author of it denounced by Robespierre, his bust publicly burned in Paris, and the medal formerly voted him broken by the hand of the executioner. He deemed it necessary to seek an asylum in a neutral country. Having provided for the safety of his army, he crossed the frontiers in August 1792, accompanied by 21 persons, all of whom, on passing an Austrian post, were taken prisoner, and Lafayette was thrown into a dungeon. The friend of liberty and order was looked upon as a common enemy. His noble wife, who had been for 15 months a prisoner in Paris, hastened after her release to share her husband's captivity. For 5 years, in spite of the remonstrances of England, America, and the friends of liberty everywhere, Lafayette remained a prisoner. To every demand for his liberation, the Austrian government replied, with its usual stupidity, that the liberty of Lafayette was incompatible with the safety of the governments of Europe. He owed his liberation at length to General Bonaparte, and it required all his great authority to procure it. When Lafayette was presented to Napoleon to thank him for his interference, the first consul said to him, "I don't know what the devil you have done to the Austrians, but it cost them a mighty struggle to let you go." Lafayette voted publicly against making Napoleon consul for life, against the establishment of the empire. Notwithstanding this, Napoleon and he remained very good friends. The emperor said of him one day, "Everybody in France is corrected of his extreme ideas of liberty except one man, and that man is Lafayette. You see him now tranquil. Very well. If he had an opportunity to serve his chimeras, he would reappear on the scene more ardent than ever." Upon his return to France, he was granted the pension belonging to the military rank he had held under the Republic, and he recovered a competent estate from the property of his wife. Napoleon also gave a military commission to his son, George Washington, and when the Bourbons were restored, Lafayette received an indemnity of 450,000 francs. Napoleon's remarks proved correct. Lafayette, though he spent most of the evening of his life in directing the cultivation of his estate, was always present at every crisis in the affairs of France to plead the cause of constitutional liberty. He made a fine remark once in its defense, which taunted with the horrors of the French Revolution. The tyranny of 1973, he said, was no more a republic than the massacre of St. Bartholomew was a religion. His visit to America in 1824 is well remembered. He was made the guest of the nation, and Congress, in recompense of his expenditures during the Revolutionary War, made him a grant of $200,000 and an extensive tract of land. It was Lafayette who in 1830 was chiefly instrumental in placing a constitutional monarch on the throne of France. The last words he ever spoke in public were uttered in behalf of the French refugees who had fled from France for offenses merely political, and the last words he ever wrote recommended the abolition of slavery. He died May 19, 1834, aged 77. His son, George Washington, always the friend of liberty like his father, died in 1849, leaving two sons, inheritor of a name so full of inspiration to the world. End of chapter 52. Chapter 53 of Brave Men and Women, Their Struggles, Failures, and Triumphs by Osgood E. Fuller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kristen Hand. Lydia Sigourney, born 1791, died 1865. The lesson of a useful and beautiful life. A beautiful life I have had, not more trial than was for my good. Countless blessings beyond expectation or desert. Behind me stretch the green pastures and still waters by which I have been led all my days. Around is the lingering of hardy flowers and fruits that bide the winter. Before stretches the shining shore. These are the words of Mrs. Sigourney, written near the close of a life of 74 years. All who have much observed human life will agree that the rarest achievement of man or woman on this earth is a solid and continuous happiness. There are very few persons past 70 who can look back upon their lives and sincerely say they would willingly live their lives over again. Mrs. Sigourney, however, was one of the happy few. Lydia Huntley, for that was her maiden name, was born at Norwich, Connecticut on the 1st of September, 1791. Her father was Ezekiel Huntley, an exceedingly gentle, affectionate man of Scotch parentage, who had as little of a Yankee in him as any man in Connecticut. Unlike a Yankee, he never attempted to set up in business for himself, but spent the whole of the active part of his life in the service of the man to whom he was apprenticed in his youth. His employer was a druggist of great note in his day, who made a large fortune in his business, and built one of the most elegant houses in the state. On his retirement from business, his old clerk continued to reside under his roof, and to assist in the management of his estate, and even when he died, Mr. Huntley did not change his abode, but remained to conduct the affairs of the widow. In the service of this family he saved a competence for his old age, and he lived to 87, a most happy, serene old man, delighting chiefly in his garden and his only child. He survived as late as 1839. Owing to the peculiar relation sustained by her father to a wealthy family, living too in a wing of their stately mansion, and having the free range of its extensive gardens, Lydia Huntley enjoyed in her youth all the substantial advantages of wealth without encountering its perils. She was surrounded by objects pleasing or beautiful, but no menial pampered her pride or robbed her of her rightful share of household labor. As soon as she was old enough to toddle about the grounds, her father delighted to have her hold the trees which he was planting, and drop the seed into the little furrows prepared for it. And never was she better pleased than when giving him the aid of her tiny fingers. Her parents never kept a servant, and she was brought up to do her part in the house. Living on plain, substantial fare, inured to labor, and dressed so as to allow free play to every limb and muscle, she laid in a stock of health, strength, and good temper that lasted her down to the last year of her life. She never knew what dyspepsia was. She never possessed a costly toy, nor a doll that was not made at home, but she passed a childhood that was scarcely anything but joy. She was an only child, and she was the pet of 2 families, yet she was not spoiled. She was one of those children who take naturally to all kinds of culture. Without ever having had a child's book, she sought out in the old-fashioned library of the house everything which a child could understand. Chance threw a novel in her way, Mysteries of Udolpho, which she devoured with rapture, and soon after, when she was but 8 years of age, she began to write a novel. Poetry, too, she read with singular pleasure, never weary of repeating her favorite pieces. But the passion of her childhood was painting pictures. Almost in her infancy she began to draw with a pen and lilac leaf, and advanced from that to slate and pencil, and by and by to a lead pencil and backs of letters. When she had learned to draw pretty well, she was on fire to paint her pictures, but was long puzzled to procure the colors. Having obtained in some way a cake of gamboge, she begged of a washerwoman a piece of indigo, and by combining these 2 ingredients she could make different shades of yellow, blue, and green. The trunks of her trees she painted with coffee grounds, and a mixture of India ink and indigo answered tolerably well for sky and water. She afterwards discovered that the pink juice of chokeberry did very well for lips, cheeks, and gay dresses. Mixed with a little indigo it made a very bad purple, which the young artist, for the want of a better, was obliged to use for her royal robes. In sore distress for a better purple, she squeezed the purple flowers of the garden and the field for the desired tint, but nothing answered the purpose, until at dinner one day she found the very hue for which she longed in the juice of a currant and whortleberry tart. She hastened to try it, and it made a truly gorgeous purple, but the sugar in it caused it to come off in flakes from her kings and emperors, leaving them in a sorry plight. At length, to her boundless, inexpressible, and lasting joy, all her difficulties were removed by her father giving her a complete box of colors. At school she was fortunate in her teachers. One of them was the late Palatia Parrott, who afterward won high distinction as a New York merchant and universal philanthropist. Her first serious attempts at practical compositions were translations from Virgil when she was 14 years of age. After leaving school, she studied Latin with much zeal under an aged tutor, and later in life she advanced far enough in Hebrew to read the Old Testament, with the aid of grammar and dictionary. To these grave studies her parents added a thorough drill in dancing. Often, when her excellent mother observed that she had sat too long over her books, she would get her out upon the floor of their large kitchen, and then, striking up a lively song, set her dancing until her cheeks were all aglow. This studious and happy girl, like other young people, had her daydream of the future. It was to keep a school. This strange ambition, she tells us in her autobiography, she feared to impart to her companions, lest they should laugh at her, and she thought even her parents would think her arrogant if she mentioned it to them. The long-cherished secret was revealed to her parents at length. Her mother had guessed it before, but her father was exceedingly surprised. Neither of them, however, made any objection, and one of the pleasantest apartments of their house was fitted up for the reception of pupils. She was then a delicate-looking girl of about 18 and rather undersized. As soon as her desks were brought home by the carpenter, the ambitious little lady went around to the families of the place, informed them of her intention, and solicited their patronage at the established rate of $3 a quarter for each pupil. She was puzzled and disappointed at the coolness with which her project was received. Day after day she tramped the streets of Norwich, only to return at night without a name upon her catalogue. She surmised, after a time, that parents hesitated to entrust their children to her because of her extreme youth, which was the fact. At length, however, she began her school with 2 children, 9 and 11 years of age, and not only did she go through all the formalities of school with them, working 6 hours a day for 5 days and 3 hours on Saturday, but at the end of term she held an examination in the presence of a large circle of her pupils' admiring relations. Afterward, associating herself with another young lady to whom she was tenderly attached, she succeeded better. A large and populous school gathered about these zealous and admirable girls, several of their pupils being older than themselves. Compelled to hold the school in a larger room, Lydia Huntley walked 2 miles every morning and 2 more every night, besides working hard all day, and she was as happy as the weeks were long. Her experience confirms that of every genuine teacher, from Dr. Arnold downward, that of all employments of man or woman on this earth, the one that is capable of giving the most constant and intense happiness is teaching in a rationally conducted school. So fond was she of teaching that when the severity of the winter obliged her to suspend the school for many weeks, she opened a free school for poor children, one of her favorite classes in which was composed of colored girls. In the course of time, the well-known Daniel Wadsworth, the great man of Hartford 60 or 70 years ago, lured her away to that city, where he personally organized a school of 30 young ladies, the daughters of his friends, and gave her a home in his own house. There she spent 5 happy years, cherished as a daughter by her venerable patron and his wife, and held in high honor by her pupils and their parents. It was in 1815, while residing in Hartford, that her fame was born. Good old Mrs. Wadsworth, having obtained sight of her journals and manuscripts in prose and verse, the secret accumulation of many years, inflamed her husband's curiosity so that he too asked to see them. The blushing poetess consented. Mr. Wadsworth pronounced some of them worthy of publication, and under his auspices a volume was printed in Hartford, entitled Moral Pieces in Prose and Verse. The public gave it a generous welcome, and its success led to a career of authorship which lasted 49 years, and gave to the world 56 volumes of poetry, tales, travels, biography, and letters. So passed her life till she was past 28. She had received many offers of marriage from clergymen and others, but none of her suitors tempted her to forsake her pupils, and she supposed herself destined to spend her days as an old maid. But another destiny was in store for her. On her way to and from her school, a pair of deep-set and most expressive black eyes sometimes encountered hers and spoke unutterable things. Those eyes belonged to a widower with 3 children named Charles Sigourney, a thriving hardware merchant of French descent, and those unutterable things were uttered at length through the unromantic medium of a letter. The marriage occurred a few months after, in the year 1819. For the next 15 years she resided in the most elegant mansion in Hartford, surrounded by delightful grounds, after Mr. Sigourney's own design, and even now, though the Sigourney place is eclipsed in splendor and costliness by many of more recent date, there is no abode in the beautiful city of Hartford more attractive than this. Mr. Sigourney was a man of considerable learning and exceedingly interested in the study of languages. When he was past 50, he began the study of modern Greek. Mrs. Sigourney became the mother of several children, all of whom but 2 died in infancy. One son lived to enter college, but died at the age of 19 of consumption. A daughter grew to womanhood and became the wife of a clergyman. After many years of very great prosperity in business, Mr. Sigourney experienced heavy losses, which compelled them to leave their pleasant residence, and gave a new activity to her pen. He died at the age of 76. During the last 7 years of Mrs. Sigourney's life, her chief literary employment was contributing to the columns of the New York Ledger. Mr. Bonner, having while an apprentice in the Hartford Courant office set up some of her poems, had particular pleasure in being the medium of her last communications with the public, and she must have rejoiced in the vast audience to which he gave her access, the largest she ever addressed. Mrs. Sigourney enjoyed excellent health to within a few weeks of her death. After a short illness which she bore with much patience, she died in June 1865 with her daughter at her side and affectionate friends around her. Nothing could exceed her tranquillity and resignation at the approach of death. Her long life had been spent in honorable labor for the good of her species, and she died in the fullest certainty that death would but introduce her to a larger and better sphere. End of chapter 53. Chapter 54 of Brave Men and Women, Their Struggles, Failures, and Triumphs by Osgood E. Fuller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kristen Hand. Old Age and Usefulness. The Glory of Brave Men and Women. Dear Lord, I thank Thee for a life of use. Dear Lord, I do not pine for any truce. Peace, peace has always come from duty done. Peace, peace will so until the end be won. Thanks, thanks, a thankful heart is my reward. Thanks, thanks, befit the children of the Lord. Wind, wind, the peaceful reel must still go round. Wind, wind, the thread of life will soon be wound. The worker has no dread of growing old. First years of toil, and then the age of gold. For lo, he hopes to bear his flag unfurled beyond the threshold of another world. John Foster, he who sprang into celebrity from one essay, Popular Ignorance, had a diseased feeling against growing old, which seems to us to be very prevalent. He was sorry to lose every parting hour. I have seen a fearful sight today, he would say. I have seen a buttercup. To others the sight would only give visions of the coming spring and future summer. To him it told of the past year, the last Christmas, the days which would never come again, the so many days nearer the grave. Thackeray continually expressed the same feeling. He reverts to the merry old time when George III was king. He looks back with a regretful mind to his own youth. The black care constantly rides behind his chariot. Ah, my friends, he says, how beautiful was youth. We are growing old. Springtime and summer are past. We are near the winter of our days. We shall never feel as we have felt. We approach the inevitable grave. Few men indeed know how to grow old gracefully, as Madame de Staël very truly observed. There is an unmanly sadness at leaving off the old follies and the old games. We all hate fogyism. Dr. Johnson, great and good as he was, had a touch of this regret, and we may pardon him for the feeling. A youth spent in poverty and neglect, a manhood consumed in unceasing struggle, are not preparatives to growing old in peace. We fancy that, after a stormy morning and a lowering day, the evening should have a sunset glow, and when the night sets in, look back with regret at the gusty, babbling, and remorseless day. But if we do so, we miss the supporting faith of the Christian and the manly cheerfulness of the heathen. To grow old is quite natural. Being natural, it is beautiful, and if we grumble at it, we miss the lesson and lose all the beauty. Half our life is spent in vain regrets. When we are boys, we ardently wish to be men. When men, we wish as ardently to be boys. We sing sad songs of the lapse of time. We talk of auld lang syne, of the days when we were young, of gathering shells on the seashore and throwing them carelessly away. We never cease to be sentimental upon past youth and lost manhood and beauty. Yet there are no regrets so false, and few half so silly. Perhaps the saddest sight in the world is to see an old lady, wrinkled and withered, dressing, talking, and acting like a very young one, and forgetting all the time, as she clings to the feeble remnant of the past, that there is no sham so transparent as her own, and that people, instead of feeling with her, are laughing at her. Old boys disguise their foibles a little better, but they are equally ridiculous. The feeble protests which they make against the flying chariot of time are equally futile. The great mower enters the field, and all must come down. To stay him would be impossible. We might as well try with a finger to stop Ixion's wheel, or to dam up the current of the Thames with a child's foot. Since the matter is inevitable, we may as well sit down and reason it out. Is it so dreadful to grow old? Does old age need its apologies and its defenders? Is it a benefit or a calamity? Why should it be odious and ridiculous? An old tree is picturesque, an old castle venerable, an old cathedral inspires awe. Why should man be worse than his works? Let us, in the first place, see what youth is. Is it so blessed and happy and flourishing as it seems to us? Schoolboys do not think so. They always wish to be older. You cannot insult one of them more than by telling him that he is a year or two younger than he is. He fires up at once. 12, did you say, sir? No, I am 14. But men and women who have reached 28 do not thus add to their years. Amongst schoolboys, notwithstanding the general tenor of those romanticists who see that everything young bears a rose-colored blush, misery is prevalent enough. Emerson, Coleridge, Wordsworth were each and all unhappy boys. They all had their rebuffs and bitter, bitter troubles, all the more bitter because their sensitiveness was so acute. Suicide is not unknown amongst the young. Fears prey upon them and terrify them, ignorances and follies surround them. Arriving at manhood, we are little better off. If we are poor, we mark the difference between the rich and us. We see position gains all the day. If we are as clever as Hamlet, we grow just as philosophically disappointed. If we love, we can only be sure of a brief pleasure, an April day. Love has its bitterness. It is, says Ovid, an adept in the matter, full of anxious fear. We fret and fume at the authority of the wise heads. We have an intense idea of our own talent. We believe calves of our own age to be as big and as valuable as full-grown bulls. We envy whilst we jest at the old. We cry with the puffed-up hero of the patrician's daughter, "It may be by the calendar of years you are the elder man, but 'tis the sun of knowledge on the mind's dial shining bright, and chronicling deeds and thoughts, that makes true time." And yet withal, life is very unhappy, whether we live amongst the grumbling captains of the clubs, who are ever seeking and not finding promotion, amongst the struggling authors and rising artists who never rise, or among the young men who are full of riches, titles, places, and honor, who have every wish fulfilled and are miserable because they have nothing to wish for. Thus the young Romans killed themselves after the death of their emperor, not for grief, not for affection, not even for the fashion of suicide, which grew afterwards prevalent enough, but from the simple weariness of doing everything over and over again. Old age has passed such stages as these, landed on a safer shore, and matriculated in a higher college, in a purer air. We sigh not for impossibilities, we cry not, "Bring these anew, and set me once again in the delusion of life's infancy. I was not happy, but I knew not then, that happy I was never doomed to be." We know that we are not happy. We know that life, perhaps, was not given us to be continuously comfortable and happy. We've been behind the scenes and know all the illusions. But when we are old, we are far too wise to throw life away for mere ennui. With Dandolo refusing a crown at 96, winning battles at 94, with Wellington planning and superintending fortifications at 80, with Bacon and Humboldt students to the last gasp, with wise old Montaigne, shrewd in his gray-beard wisdom and loving life, even in the midst of his fits of gout and colic, age knows far too much to act like a sulky child. It knows too well the results and the value of things to care about them, that the ache will subside, the pain be lulled, the estate we coveted be worth little, the titles, ribbons, gewgaws, honors, be all more or less worthless. Who has honor? He that died a Wednesday. Such a one passed us in the race and gained it but to fall. We are still up and doing. We may be frosty and shrewd, but kindly. We can wish all men well, like them too, so far as they may be liked, and smile at the fuss, bother, hurry, and turmoil, which they make about matters which to us are worthless dross. The greatest prize in the whole market, in any and in every market, success, is to the old man nothing. He cares little who is up and who is down, the present he lives in and delights in. Thus, in one of those admirable comedies in which Robson acted, we find the son a wanderer, the mother's heart nearly broken, the father torn and broken by a suspicion of his son's dishonesty, but the grandfather all the while concerned only about his gruel and his handkerchief. Even the pains and troubles incident to his state visit the old man lightly. Because Southey sat for months in his library, unable to read or touch the books he loved, we are not to infer that he was unhappy. If the stage darkens as the curtain falls, certain it also is that the senses grow duller and more blunted. "Don't cry for me, my dear," said an old lady undergoing an operation. "I do not feel it." It seems to us, therefore, that a great deal of unnecessary pity has been thrown away upon old age. We begin at school reading Cicero's treatise, hearing Cato talk with Scipio and Laelius. We hear much about poor old men. We are taught to admire the vigor, quickness, and capacity of youth and manhood. We lose sight of the wisdom which age brings even to the most foolish. We think that a circumscribed sphere must necessarily be an unhappy one. It is not always so. What one abandons in growing old is, perhaps, after all, not worth having. The chief part of youth is but excitement, often both unwise and unhealthy. The same pen which has written with a morbid feeling that there is a class of beings who do not grow old in their youth and die ere middle age, tells us also that the best of life is but intoxication. That passes away. The man who has grown old does not care about it. The author at that period has no feverish excitement about seeing himself in print. He does not hunt newspapers for reviews and notices. He is content to wait. He knows what fame is worth. The obscure man of science who has been wishing to make the world better and wiser, the struggling curate, the poor, hard-tried man of God, the enthusiastic reformer who has watched the sadly slow dawning of progress and liberty, the artist whose dream of beauty slowly fades before his dim eyes, all lay down their feverish wishes as they advance in life, forget the bright ideal which they cannot reach, and embrace the more imperfect real. We speak not here of the assured Christian. He, from the noblest pinnacle of faith, beholds a promised land, and is eager to reach it. He prays to be delivered from the body of this death. But we write of those humbler, perhaps more human souls, with whom increasing age each day treads down an illusion. All feverish wishes, raw and inconclusive desires have died down, and a calm beauty and peace survive. Passions are dead, temptations weakened or conquered. Experience has been won. Selfish interests are widened into universal ones. Vain idle hopes have merged into a firmer faith or a complete knowledge, and more light has broken in upon the soul's dark cottage, battered and decayed, through chinks which time has made. Again, old men are valuable, not only as relics of the past, but as guides and prophets for the future. They know the pattern of every turn of life's kaleidoscope. The colors merely fall into new shapes. The groundwork is just the same. The good which a calm, kind, and cheerful old man can do is incalculable. And whilst he does good to others, he enjoys himself. He looks not unnaturally to that which should accompany old age: honor, love, obedience, troops of friends, and he plays his part in the comedy or tragedy of life with as much gusto as anyone else. Old Montague or Capulet and old Polonius, that wise Maxim man, enjoy themselves quite as well as the moody Hamlet, the perturbed Laertes, or even gallant Mercutio or lovesick Romeo. Friar Lawrence, who is a good old man, is perhaps the happiest of all in the dramatis personae. Unless we take the gossiping, garrulous old nurse, with her sunny recollections of maturity and youth. The great thing is to have the mind well employed, to work whilst it is yet day. The precise Duke of Wellington, answering every letter with F.M. presents his compliments. The wondrous worker Humboldt, with his orders of knighthood, stars and ribbons, lying dusty in his drawer, still contemplating Cosmos, and answering his 30 letters a day, were both men in exceedingly enviable, happy positions. They had reached the top of the hill, and could look back quietly over the rough road which they had traveled. We are not all Humboldts or Wellingtons, but we can all be busy and good. Experience must teach us all a great deal, and if it only teaches us not to fear the future, not to cast a maundering regret over the past, we can be as happy in old age, aye, and far more so, than we were in youth. We are no longer the fools of time and error. We are leaving by slow degrees the old world. We stand upon the threshold of the new, not without hope, but without fear, in an exceedingly natural position, with nothing strange or dreadful about it, with our domain drawn within a narrow circle, but equal to our power. Muscular strength, organic instincts are all gone. But what then? We do not want them. We are getting ready for the great change, one which is just as necessary as it was to be born. And to a little child, perhaps, one is not a whit more painful, perhaps not so painful as the other. The wheels of time have brought us to the goal. We are about to rest while others labor. to stay at home while others wander. We touch at last the mysterious door. Are we to be pitied or to be envied? The desert of the life behind has almost faded from my mind. It has so many fair oases, which unto me are holy places. It seems like consecrated ground where silence counts for more than sound, that way of all my past endeavor which I shall tread no more forever. And God I was too blind to see, I now somewhat from blindness free discern as ever-present glory, who holds all past and future story. Eternity is all in all, time, birth, and death ephemeral, point where a little bird alighted, then fled lest it should be benighted. End of chapter 54. Chapter 55 of Brave Men and Women, Their Struggles, Failures, and Triumphs by Osgood E. Fuller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kristen Hand. Rhymes and Chimes, all brand new, suitable for autograph albums. As free as fancy and reason, and writ for many a season, in neither spirit nor letter, to aught but beauty a debtor. Introductory. The reader knows his woes, how oft someone has blundered, how oft a thought is caught, and rhyme and reason sundered. With line and hook just look, and see a swimming hundred, a school of rhymes and chimes, as free as summer air. So if you wish to fish, please angle anywhere. 1. Thou pet of modern art, since I the spell have broken, now on thy journey start, and gather many a token, from many an honest heart, the best or thought or spoken. 2. Go forth, thou little book, and seek that wondrous treasure, affection's word and look, which only heaven can measure. 3. This album comes a-tapping at many a friendly door, yea, gently, gently rapping, has aught for me in store? Dear love and truth I show, to point a life's endeavor. Thanks for thy heart, I go and bear it on forever. 4. Whose name was writ in water, it was not so of Keats. How many a son and daughter his gentle name repeats. And friendship and affection will keep thy name as bright, if beauty give protection, and wed thee to the right. 5. So you desire my heart, well take it and depart. It is not cold and heavy, it is not light, seeks to be right, and answers beauty's levy. 6. Be it a fable or rumor, or an old device, 'tis true, gentle wit and humor are as good as cold advice. 7. This dainty little album thine is of a quality so fine that happy laughter here may write, and all the pages still be white. 8. There is no open mart in which to sell a heart, for none the price can pay, so mine I give away, since I with it must part, 'tis thine, my friend, for aye. Do I not feel the lack and want to get it back? No, no, for kindly heaven a better one has given. 9. There is a cup I know, which full to overflow, has yet the space to hold its measure many-fold. And when from it I drink, it is so sweet to think, what it retains is more than all it held before. If you my riddle guess, you surely will confess the greater in the less, which is our blessedness. 10. Dost give away thy heart with all its sweet perfume? Angels dwell where thou art, the more, the greater room. 11. A life lost in a life, true husband or true wife, a life come back again, as with a shining train. 12. A cheery maiden's love, as large as heaven and earth, that were a gift to prove how much this life is worth. 13. Fast by eternal truth and on a sunny mountain springs that perennial fountain which gives immortal youth, and all who bathe therein are washed from every sin. 14. It is to do the best, unmindful of reward, which brings the sweetest rest and nearness to the Lord. And this has been thy aim, and will be to the end, knows she who writes her name as thy unchanging friend. 15. Words, words, and pen and ink, but not a thought to think. And yet perhaps, perchance, who knows his ignorance, is not the greatest fool, although long out of school. 16. Our greatest glory, friend, is chiefly found herein, that when we fall offend, we quickly rise from sin, and make the very shame which gathered round our name, like many scorpion rings, the stairs to better things in that high citadel which has a warning bell. 17. Whence honor, wealth, or fame, which God delights to see, out of a blameless name, born of eternity. And these are prizes at God's assizes, reported day by day, which no man takes away. 18. Life is movement, action, joy, and benefaction. Rest is bravely doing, while the past reviewing. Still the years forecasting with the everlasting. Such be days of thine, such thy rest divine. 19. The brook's joy does not cloy. Too much sun, too much rain, work is done not in vain. Sun receives, and cloud leaves just enough. Skies are black and winds rough, yet no lack of good will, for 'tis still understood God is good. 20. The brook's rest is rest indeed. The brook's quest is daily need. Thoughts of tomorrow, they bring no sorrow, and so it babbles away and does the work of today. 21. The brook knows the joy down in the heart of a boy, and the swallow kens the whirl up in the head of a girl. 22. How many a psalm is heard from yon rejoicing bird that finds its daily food and feels that God is good. That little life's employ is toil and song and joy. Hast music in thy heart, O toiler day by day, along life's rugged way? Then what thou hast, thou art. 23. True, good, and beautiful, a perfect line of love and sainthood full, and it is thine. 24. Thou doest well, dear friend, thy labor is not lost. As notes in music blend, so here affection's host. Their names thy book within, their thoughts of love and truth, are worth the cost to win, first trophies of thy youth. This little album thine suggests to book divine, the book of life, God's own. What names are written there? What names are there unknown? Hast thou no thought or care? I do thee wrong to ask. God speed the nobler task, until thy labor prove indeed a work of love. 25. True friends are through friends to the next world, that unvexed world. What will friends be good for, when the witness is needless they stood for? 26. Wouldst have another gem in friendship's diadem? Then take this name of mine, thy light will make it shine. 27. Thou comest beauty laden, thou sprightly little maiden, and dancing everywhere like sunbeams in the air. And for thy cheery laugh, here is my autograph. 28. Something for nothing? No, a false device. For all things here below, we pay the price. For even grace we pay, which is so free, and I have earned today a smile from thee. 29. Friend, make good use of time. Eternity sublime is cradled in its use, and time allows no truce. The past with shadowy pall is gone beyond recall. Tomorrow is not thine. Today is all thou hast, which will not always last. Make thou today divine. 30. Every hour a duty brings thee from the courts on high. Every hour a beauty waits her transit to the sky. Wait till thou adorn her with the glory of thy heart, or until thou scorn her, shall she with thy sin depart? 31. If you seek in life success, own yourself the instrument which the Lord alone can bless, and the world as helper meant. Perseverance as your friend, and experience your eyes. Onward press to reach your end, resting not with any prize, counting it a joy to lend unto him who sanctifies. 32. That day is lost forever, whose golden sun beholds through thine endeavor no goodness done. 33. Count not thy life by heart throbs, he thinks and lives the most, who with the noblest actions adorns his chosen post. 34. The secret of the world, although in light impearled, no one can e'er discover, no one except a lover. To him are given new eyes in self's true sacrifice. 35. If love is blind and overlooks small things, he has a mind to apprehend all things. 36. As love sails down life's river, he from his gleaming quiver shoots into every heart a strange and nameless smart. How is thy heart protected? The wound is unsuspected. 37. Dost thou truly love? Nothing hard can prove, all the stress and rigor doth thy heart transfigure. 38. Love is the key of joy which keeps the man a boy when outward things decay and all his locks are gray. 39. Of heaven below, which is so sweet to know, and heaven above, the title deed is love. 40. Who is bravest of my four friends? Thou that slavest and self all spends, thou that savest and usest never, thou that cravest with no endeavor, thou that gavest and hast forever. 41. Numen, lumen, I can do without praise, I can do without money, I have found other honey to sweeten my days, and the Kaiser may wear his gold crown while I on his splendor look down. 42. God thy light, then is right life's own polar star. All thy fortunes are gifts that come from him, filling to the brim life's great golden cup, and thy heart looks up. 43. A debtor to hate, a debtor to money, forever may wait and never have honey. A debtor to love and sweet benefaction hath treasures above, a heart's satisfaction. 44. God is a liberal lender to those who use but not abuse, and daily statements render. And here's the beauty of it, he lends again the profit. 45. Days of heroic will which God and duty fill are evermore sublime and memorials of time. That such thy days may be is my best wish for thee. 46. Self-sacrifice finds paradise. Hearts that rebel are gates of hell. Goals of all races are these two places. 37. The blushes of roses and all that reposes, sublime in a hero affixed by his zero. Ah, you will complete him as soon as you meet him. 38. Maidens passing into naught, what a work by them is wrought. Not prefixes, but affixes on the better side of men. See, they multiply by 10. 49. The golden key of life, true maiden crowned a wife. What then are toil and trouble, with strength to meet them double? 50. True heaven begins on earth, around a common hearth, or in a humble heart. Thy faith means what thou art, and that which thou wouldst be, thou makest it thee. 51. Know heaven in truth and love? Then do not look above. Yet truth and love have wings, although the highest things, therewith to mount, dear friend, is life that has no end. 52. Art thou a mourner here? But one can give thee cheer. Affliction turns to grace before the Master's face. 53. My friend, my troubled friend, if true love has not found you, then I can comprehend that duty has not bound you. 54. Love is the source of duty, the parent of all life, which heaven pronounces beauty, the crown of man and wife, beginning and the end, to hero, saint, and friend. An inspiration which is so abundant, rich, that from the fingertips and from the blooming lips, yea, from the voiceful eyes, in questions and replies, from every simple action and hourly benefaction, it pours itself away, a gladness day by day, exhaustless as the sun, work done and never done. And I have painted you, O maiden fair and true. 55. The voice of God is love, as all who listen prove. Be thou assured of this, or life's chief comfort miss. 56. Oh, is not love a marvel which one cannot unravel? Behold its bitter fruit. Ah, that kind does not suit. My friend, I'm not uncivil. Self makes of love a devil, and it is love no more. His guise love never wore. But Satan steals the guise of love for foolish eyes. Therein the danger lies, but do not be too wise. Dost wait for perfect good in man or womanhood? Then thou must onward press in single blessedness, and find, perhaps too late, love dies without a mate. Perhaps this better fate, when love a banquet makes, which all the world partakes, proved never out of date. 57. Prove all things, even love, thou must needs prove. But let the touch be fine that tests a thing divine. Yea, let the touch be tender, true love will answer render. 58. 'Tis give and take, not take and give, that seeks to make folks blessed live. Where is he now? Invisible, yet on thy brow his name I spell. 59. Bear and forbear to make folk blessed, seeks everywhere to be a guest. Angelic one who art so near, thy will be done both now and here. 60. Comes knowledge at college, wisdom comes later, and is the greater. Art thou of both possessed? Then thou art richly blessed. 61. What can I wish thee better than that through all thy days, the spirit, not the letter, invite thy blame or praise? Seek ever to unroll the substance or the soul. If that be fair and pure, it will and must endure. And lo, the homely dress grows into loveliness. 62. Into the heart of man the things that bless or ban, out of the life he lives, the boon or curse he gives. Guard well thy open heart, what enters must depart. 63. Is this thine album? 'Tis nothing but a sign of something more divine. Thou art the real album, and on its wondrous pages is writ thy daily wages. Thou canst not blot a word, much less tear out a leaf, but all thy prayers are heard, and every pain and grief may be to thee as stairs to better things until thou reachest unawares the Master's mind and will. 64. Seek thou for true friends, aim thou at true ends, with God above them all. Then as the shadows lengthen, will thy endurance strengthened, with heaven thy coronal. 65. 10,000 eyes of night, one sovereign eye above, 10,000 rays of light, one central fire of love. No eyes of night appear, God's eye is never closed, no rays of light to cheer, for self hath interposed. Yet love's great fire is bright, by day as well as night. 66. Oh, we remember in leafy June and white December love's gentle tune, for nevermore on any shore is life the same as ere love came. 67. And this is the day my child came down from heaven, and this is the way the sweetest kiss is given. 68. Thy natal day, my dear, good heart, good words for cheer, and kisses now and here, with love through many a year. 69. Earthly duty, heavenly beauty. 70. Truth, her story is God's glory, her triumph on the earth, man's heavenly birth. 71. What's in a name? A symbol of reality, all human fame and God's originality. 72. Thou art so neat and trim, so modest and so wise, such gladness in thine eyes. Thou art a prize, for him and for the world, I think. So here thy health I drink, O Mother Eve's fair daughter, in this good cup of water. 73. All thou art is in thy heart. Thy mind is but a feeder, thy heart alone the leader. 74. If you want a fellow, not too ripe and mellow, just a little green, courteous, never mean, one who has a will for the steepest hill, and can rule a wife, love her as his life, and from fortune's frown weave a blessed crown, then you want the best. Win him and be blessed. 75. If you wish a dandy, mustache, curled and sandy, just the thing for parties, who, so trim and handy, knows not where his heart is, whether with your banker, or for you at hanker, why then take the dude, naught is void of good. 76. His faults are many, hast thou not any? But how will the bundles mix? Is a question for Dr. Dix, for both were picked up at Ann Arbor. 77. I cannot wish thee better in a world of many a sorrow, than that thou be a debtor to only love and tomorrow. Then pain has little anguish, and life no time to languish, when debts are paid to heaven, and grace sufficient for thee thy daily strength has given, for all is bright before thee. 78. Seek not for happiness, but just to do thy duty, and then will blessedness impart her heavenly beauty. 79. Indulge no selfish ease, each golden hour employ, seek only God to please, and thou shalt life enjoy. Yea, thou shalt then please all, and blessings on thee fall. 80. To use thy time discreetly, to show forbearance sweetly, to do thy duty neatly, to trust in God completely, is good advice to give, and best of all, to live. 81. If words are light as cloud foam, so too is mountain air. If in the air is beauty, so too may words be fair. If in the air contagion, distemper words may bear. Our words are real things, and full of good or ill. The tongue that heals or stings, so needs the master's will. 82. The world has many a fool, the schemer many a tool. A mirror shows them, the wise man knows them. 10,000 disguises, 10,000 surprises. In wisdom is detection, in righteousness protection. 83. To do good to another is thyself to well serve, and to succor thy brother for thyself is fresh nerve, and new strength for the battle, in the dash and the rattle, when thy foes press thee hard, and thy all thou must guard. 84. Canst show a finer touch, a grain of purer lore. I could not love thee, dear, so much. Loved I not honor more? 85. Frittered away, grace to begin, duty today, wages of sin. Truth out of sight, falsehood crept in, wrong put for right, wages of sin. Self become God, eager to win, all at its nod, wages of sin. Scorn of the seer, vanity's grin, darkness grown dear, wages of sin. Trouble without, canker within, fear, hate, and doubt, wages of sin. What is to be, all that has been, shadows that flee, wages of sin. Loss of the soul, wrangle and din, tragedies dole, wages of sin. Warning enough, mortals are kin, ragged and rough, wages of sin. 86. Words great to express him, revealer and healer, but these ye confess him. Enough, this beginning, before ye the glory known only in winning. Indeed bearing duty, behold him, enfold him, the king in his beauty. Until ye discover how meetly, how sweetly he rules as a lover. And then will confession, O new men, now true men, be one with possession. 87. O wouldst thou know the rarity of charity? Thyself forego. Then will the field, to God inviting, to man requiting, sweet harvest yield. 88. In consecration to single-hearted toil is animation, yea, life's true wine and oil. And that vocation, which heart and mind secures, hath consolation that verily endures. 89. To fast and pray the livelong day is preparation, O doubt it not, for some high lot, but in thy deed, not in thy creed, is consummation. 90. It is the cheerful heart that finds the key of gold, the bravely acted part which gets the grip and hold, and opens wide the door where treasures are unrolled, thine eager eyes before, then life is evermore, a strife for wealth untold. God keep thee true and bold. 91. Sometimes our failure here are God's successes, and things that seemed so drear, his sweet caresses. It is our Father's hand that gives our wages, before us many a land and all the ages. And shall we forfeit hope because the fountains are up the mighty slope of yonder mountains? 92. The storm is raging, the sun is shining, and both presaging some true refining. Through them are passing the hosts forever, all wealth amassing through brave endeavor. 93. O trees, rejoicing trees, along my path today, I hear your quiet melodies, and care all charmed away. I catch your mood, dear forest brotherhood. O trees, rejoicing trees, arrayed in springtide dress, how full ye are of prophecies of everlastingness. I find a balm in your rejoicing psalm. O trees, rejoicing trees, in living green so grand, like saints with grateful memories, ye bless the Father's hand, which stripped you bare to make you now so fair. O trees, rejoicing trees, who have another birth, through you my bounding spirit sees the day beyond the earth, eternity so calm, so fair, so free. O trees, rejoicing trees, dear children of the Lord, I thank you for the ministries which ye to me accord. New life and light burst from my wintry night. O friend, rejoicing friend, a better poem thou, to hint the joys that have no end, through gladness here and now. Be thou to me perpetual prophecy. 94. The battle is set, the field to be won. What foes have you met? What work have you done? To courage alone does victory come, to coward and drone, nor country nor home. 95. For thee of blessed name I ask not wealth or fame, nor that thy path may be from toil and trouble free. For toil is everywhere, some trouble all must bear, and wealth and fame are not with better stuff unwrought. I crave for thy dear heart eternal duties part. For then indeed I know thy pathway here below will bloom with roses fair and beauty everywhere, and this will be enough when winds are wild and rough to keep thy heart in peace. 96. All things today have voices to tell the joy of heaven, which unto earth is given. This winter flower rejoices, this snowy hellebore, which blooms forevermore on merry Christmas Day, reminding us of one here born a virgin son to take our sins away. The death it leaves within is but the death of sin, which death to die was born, the pure and guiltless child, who justice reconciled, and oped the gates of morn, what time a crimson flame, throughout a word of shame, did purge away the dross, and leave the blood-red gold, whose worth cannot be told, he purchased on the cross. And thus a prophecy of him on Calvary, who takes our sins away, is this fair snow-white flower, which has of death the power, and blooms on Christmas Day. 97. True friendship writes thee here a birthday souvenir, all blessings on thee, dear, for this and many a year. 98. A myth that grew within the brain relates that Eden's bowers did not, mid all their wealth, contain the glory of the flowers. Because there were no opened eyes to take that glory in, the sweet and innocent surprise which looks rebuke to sin. For love and innocence and truth there made their dwelling place, than which fair three immortal youth required no other grace. But when through sin the happy seat was lost to wretched man, our Lord redeeming love to meet, redeeming work began. The flowers which have a language now shall deck the weary earth, and while men neath their burdens bow, remind them of their birth. And with their vernal beauty rife, to all the gospel preach, the resurrection and the life, in sweet pervasive speech. 99. Reader, if thou hast found thy life to reach and sound some thought among these rhymes, my school of rhymes and chimes, then this I pray thee, con, somewhat to feed upon. It has a kind of lunch, served with Olympian punch, to brace thee every night and make thy mornings bright. Complines at even song to make thee brave and strong. Sunday night. Thou, Father, givest sleep, so calm, so sweet, so deep, and all thy children share thy goodness everywhere, and to thy likeness grow, who love to others show. Grant me more love, I pray, than I have shown today. O Father, Son, and Dove, dear Trinity of love, hear thou my even song, and keep me brave and strong. Monday night. Before I go to sleep, that I in joy may reap, Lord, take the tares away which I have sown today. Productive make the wheat, for thine own gardener meet, and give me grace tomorrow to sow no seeds of sorrow. O Father, Son, and Dove, dear Trinity of love, hear thou my even song, and keep me brave and strong. Tuesday night. While I am wrapped in sleep, and others watch and weep, dear Lord, remember them, their flood of sorrow stem, take all their grief away, turn thou their night today, until in thee they rest, who art of friends the best. O Father, Son, and Dove, dear Trinity of love, hear thou my even song, and keep me brave and strong. Wednesday night. Night is for prayer and sleep. Behind the western steep now has the sun gone down, with his great golden crown. O Son of righteousness, arise, thy children bless, with healing in thy wings, cure all our evil things. O Father, Son, and Dove, dear Trinity of love, hear thou my even song, and keep me brave and strong. Thursday night. While I am safe asleep, good shepherd of the sheep, if some poor lamb of thine stray from the fold divine into the desert night, in the sweet morning light, choose me to bring it thence through thy dear providence. O Father, Son, and Dove, dear Trinity of love, hear thou my even song, and keep me brave and strong. Friday night. That I may sweetly sleep, thy child, O Father, keep, to wake and love thee more than I have done before. And do thou prosper all who on thy goodness call, and take their sins away who have not learned to pray. O Father, Son, and Dove, dear Trinity of love, hear thou my even song, and keep me brave and strong. Saturday night. If death upon me creep, while I in darkness sleep, dear Lord, whose time is best, be thou my bed and rest. Then at thy smile of light will my dark cell grow bright, and angel sentinels ring the sweet morning bells. O Father, Son, and Dove, dear Trinity of love, hear thou my even song, and keep me brave and strong. 100. There is no bitterness without some lump of sweet. Without some blessedness, there is no sad defeat. And there is no confusion without some order fair, no infinite diffusion, but unity is there. The goodness of the Lord is round about us here, beholding it reward to fill the heart with cheer. All things are ever tending to some divine event, the sweet and bitter blending with some divine intent. All things are ever tending to some divine event, the sweet to have no ending. Avaunt, O discontent! Brave men and women all, how are we comforted with honey out of gall, served with our daily bread. Finis. End of chapter 55. End of Brave Men and Women, Their Struggles, Failures, and Triumphs by Osgood E. Fuller.